I want to welcome everyone to the WellVine Symposium. This is the second time we've had this gathering. The first one was in 2021, so glad to be back again. And I also want to make sure that Ralph Jerome knows that we know that he's able to zoom in, and I'll introduce him later. So my name is Harold Schmitz, and I'm a senior scholar with the Graduate School of Management at UC Davis, and also chair the Science Advisory Board for Sonomaceuticals. And I spent 25 years in the food industry with Mars Incorporated, and prior to that, received a PhD in food science, and with the focus being on natural products chemistry. And as you'll see today, we're going to see a lot of natural products chemistry, both with respect to human health interests as well as human sensory and flavor and taste interests as well. But you'll definitely see some chemistry. So it's a great pleasure to be here talking about that. And then I also want to thank Barbara Banke and Peggy Firth for their many years, decade plus of support of this program, and also hosting this incredible event. Really, really appreciate that. So, in 1991, the world saw red, and they saw it through the lens of 60 Minutes. And this changed not only changed the world of wine, but it also changed the world of natural products chemistry that I referred to, because 60 Minutes did a report on what they called the French paradox, which was in effect that epidemiological evidence suggested what was more important than the food you consumed were the beverages that you consumed, and in this case the beverage being red wine, and there was a reduction that was observed epidemiologically in France, certain regions of France, in terms of cardiovascular disease, and this was attributed to a class of natural products called polyphenols that occur in grapes and also throughout nature in lots of different forms. There's literally thousands and thousands of polyphenols, but this became very exciting news, and red wine became very, very popular. And then in 2021, actually, almost 30 years to the day later, the world actually discovered what you're going to discover today, which is actually there's some really interesting stuff going on in white wine. And we affectionately call this the Chardonnay paradox, because we have been discovering these natural products in Chardonnay specifically during the past several years. And so in addition to the polyphenols that I mentioned that are attributed to have cardiovascular health benefits, we've discovered a range of polyphenols in Chardonnay. And also we've discovered a range of really interesting compounds called oligosaccharides, which are part of the group of natural products and foods that we call fiber. And so work done at UC Davis and in partnership with the Jackson Family Wines group and Sonomaceuticals led to this discovery. It actually garnered media attention around the world, and I think this is some really interesting verbiage from the press release, which is that these compounds, actually some of them are found in human breast milk, and some of these help build immunity against illness and disease. So part of why, the light bulb that went off in our heads around the Chardonnay paradox is not only are the polyphenols in red wine and red wine grapes that we've known to come and love, but also this work with the Chardonnay grape has illuminated a whole new class of compounds that not only might have cardiovascular health benefits, but also can help us with our immunity. And so this was a great collaborative effort. We often talk about the team of teams, and in this case, the team of teams was Jackson Family Wines, Sonomaceuticals that Barbara and Peggy founded, as well as UC Davis. You see the Davis emblem there. And particularly liked this quote from Daniela Barilla, who's a world-leading expert in these oligosaccharide compounds and understanding their roles in human health. And she noted that early results are promising that actually Chardonnay Marc can become a source for developing, supplements and other food products. And we're gonna hear a lot about that today. Then a little bit later, another year later, I think we really landed on what the real paradox is about. And it's not just this really interesting health paradox in terms of the potential health benefits, but also the fact that working with the material that results from the winemaking process, is known as the Marc, Chardonnay Marc, there's an opportunity to benefit environmental sustainability by utilizing what we thought was a waste product, at best was called a byproduct, but now we know is a high-value product. And also this high-value product called Marc not only contained natural products that could be really healthy for us, but also could be quite tasty. And so we affectionately termed this as the trifecta. So this trifecta did show up on the cover of the world's leading agriculture and food chemistry journal. It's the Journal of Agriculture and Food Chemistry. Nice name, and that's exactly what it is. And it's published by the American Chemical Society. And they were so struck by this paradox that we reported on that they actually put us on the cover of the journal, which for the science world is a big deal, actually. And as I said, we termed it the trifecta, and UC Davis, their public relations group actually put this headline out, which is a trifecta of health, taste, and sustainability. So not only are we discovering that Chardonnay has some interesting health potential, it's actually raising the game to a new level for all natural products-based ingredients, which is, we need to not only deliver health benefits, but we need to taste good, and we need to be environmentally sustainable as well. So, welcome to the Chardonnay paradox. White wine grapes are just as interesting as red wine grapes regarding health benefits, maybe even more so. I'll let you be the judge of that after you see the presentations today. Chardonnay Marc enables food to be healthier. So when you actually mix this into food products like the chocolate, the vin de bar chocolate that we'll talk about, it's paradoxically makes that food, that great tasting food, even healthier. Chardonnay Marc enables healthy food to taste better. This is kind of, how good can it get, right, folks? So, it's not only is the material itself interesting, but it enables healthy food to taste better. And this is really, when you think about public health challenges, the real challenge is compliance. And compliance is dependent upon people liking what they're putting in their mouths. And so that's part of why we're so excited about these discoveries that the science team has been unveiling. And Chardonnay Marc can actually make chocolate healthier and taste even better. So, I came from the chocolate industry, Mars Incorporated, and one would think you couldn't make, the food of the gods taste better. Actually, it turns out Chardonnay Marc makes the chocolate taste better, and you'll hear more about that from Ralph when he presents in a bit. And I'd say this is just the beginning, and from the speakers you'll hear today, let your imaginations run wild, and definitely I'm sure there's many other things that we can think about that this trifecta and this paradox can make better. Scott, he's the Chief Operating Officer for Sonomaceuticals. Scott has a long history in the dietary supplements and foods industry. He's a microbiologist in training, so has a really good feel for the scientific method and how that can be applied to actually not only make discoveries, but then figure out how to apply them to make people healthier. And given his microbiology background, you'll probably hear him talk about either up here or in discussions. You'll hear him talk about gut health, and he's been leading the Sonomaceuticals effort, and he's going to tell us exactly what this material is that we're working with, and we're so excited about, and frankly, is this first trifecta of what we believe new ingredients from natural products should look like. So, Scott, please approach the podium.
Thanks, Harold. So as Harold said, I'm Chief Operating Officer, which means that if you're enjoying the symposium and this wonderful venue and everything, you can bring those compliments to me. If you have any complaints, you can talk to Fanny in the back there. Actually, Fanny is really the one who put this thing together for us, and my thanks to her. If it weren't for her corralling all of us, the scientists, the business people, everyone, all the different ideas and interests and everything we have, probably wouldn't have come together. So thanks, Fanny. We really appreciate that. Also, thank you to Doug Brown and his team back there in Mission Control for making this all possible on Zoom and everything else. So, I actually think that the interesting thing about what we're doing here with Chardonnay is just how much of a surprise so many of the things that we've discovered are. So, superfood, I think, is a term that's maybe a little overused. Nonetheless, I think it's really appropriate for what we're doing. But I think for everyone, when I tell them that Chardonnay is a superfood, they're either a little skeptical or they're a little surprised, right? You really don't think of it in that context. And speaking of surprises, just a little side note here. When I got to the hotel yesterday, this was the text that my wife sent me. So she said, "Don't freak out." Of course, I immediately replied with, "Okay." And then she replied with this picture, which is why I don't have a suit and tie on today. So, but I figure if it's good enough for Harold, right? It's good for me. I thought about going full Harold, but I didn't have my shorts with me, and I don't spend as much time on a bike, so my legs aren't nearly as defined as his. So, but I thought I'd start by telling you a little bit about just wine in general. I'm sure a lot of you already know much of this, but when I started looking into it, I had always thought that wine had been around for a few thousand years, but 8,000 years was a little bit of a surprise. So, and this is the earliest known winemaking from archaeological evidence. It's probably likely that it even goes back further than that. So humans have been cultivating and using wine grapes for at least 8,000 years, perhaps even more. It's one of the most ancient foods we have, as a matter of fact. And today, there are more than 10,000 varieties of grapes. About 300 of those are used and commonly made into wine. But the amount of diversity that you find in this fruit, in this crop, is incredible. So these are all different wine grapes. Look at the size, look at the color, look at the immense variety that you find there. And so the amount of diversity that we see here, the amount of potential in terms of bioactives and food content, it's really very, very amazing. Probably one of the most diverse crops that we know of. So one of the things that distinguishes wine grapes, though, from regular grapes is that they are smaller, they're sweeter, and the seeds. And the seeds are a really interesting thing. So if you look at other berries, grapes are a berry. If you look at other berries, think about raspberries or cranberries or strawberries. The seeds in relationship to the fruit are actually very, very small. The mass of those seeds isn't that significant when you compare it with the mass of the berry. But when you look at a wine grape, those seeds are actually really large as a percentage and as a ratio to what's in there. It actually comprises a fair amount of the mass that's there. That's one of the keys to what we're doing, actually. We're going to talk about that a little bit more, but that seed mass is very important. The other thing that's really important to realize is that in a wine grape, that skin to pulp ratio is also very high, right? So you've got a lot more color, you've got a lot more flavor and aroma and everything else in a wine grape than you would have in a regular grape or many other fruits, because there's so much more skin in relationship to pulp. And that means you have a lot more flavor. And when you think about it, it makes sense. Because a wine grape is designed to be fermented, which means in the product that you get from wine grapes, there's no sugar. It's all been fermented out. So if you want it to taste good and you want it to be interesting and you want it to be high value, you have to make sure that if you're a farmer and you're breeding it or you've got a vineyard, over time you're selecting the best grapes. And so, over the last 8,000 years, these things have been carefully selected and cultivated to taste good even if there's no sugar present. And that's really interesting, because the same things that make it taste good and that make it colorful are the same things that make it healthy. So that's why it's a superfood. It's a superfood because humans have been, not consciously, but they've been selecting it for those very properties over time because they've been looking for something that has really interesting taste and color profiles, even without a lot of sugar in it. So that leads us to the second question that I usually get from people when I tell them that we're making chocolate with Chardonnay in it. The first question is, do you have any of that chocolate on you? The second question is, why Chardonnay? You've got all these wine grapes out there that you could work with. Why did you pick Chardonnay to work with? Well, the simple answer is, it's actually surprisingly healthy. So when Sonomaceuticals was founded back in 2009, actually, it's been a long journey, there were 8 different products that Sonomaceuticals was looking at, 8 different grapes, actually. So they were working with Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay, Merlot, Syrah, Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Noir, Zinfandel, and Riesling. These were all of the materials that we were capturing out of a wine press, turning into powders. And at the time, actually, we were separating seeds and skins. We were making oil from the seeds. So we had 24 different raw materials that we were working with at that time. Pretty amazing endeavor, actually. In the course of doing that work, though, we started to do a little bit of investigation into some of the health benefits. And what we found was, to everyone's surprise, this work was done for us largely at USDA, that Chardonnay was the one that kept coming up as being the best. In comparison with Cab, in comparison with Merlot, and in even the reds, we found that Chardonnay had more profound health effects than the others, starting with a blood glucose analysis, then moving on to plasma insulin effects. From there, we looked at plasma lipoprotein. So basically, we're talking about cholesterol and the amount of HDL, VDL, and LDL in a product, in blood. And then we thought, well, maybe the chemistry is what's driving it. So we started looking at the polyphenols, and we compared it with other whites because they weren't performing as well, and found out that actually Chardonnay does have higher levels of polyphenols, catechins, and epicatechins, epigallocatechin than these other varieties do. So this was surprising, actually. People were assuming, number one, that reds were going to be better for you than whites. It didn't turn out to be true in the testing that USDA did. And secondly, that, Chardonnay itself was thought of as just being kind of a really delicious wine, but not necessarily a heavyweight when it came to bioactivity. Not true. And after looking at these polyphenols, with some encouragement from Harold and others at UC Davis, we started to look into the oligosaccharides, which you're going to hear a lot more about that today. So we looked at the oligosaccharides and thought, well, what kind of potential do these oligosaccharides have for actually helping in modulation of the microbiome? And to our surprise, we found that not only was there good potential for actually feeding the bacteria that we think of as friendly bacteria, but what this slide shows here is that it suppresses the growth of the undesirable bacteria, which is a really cool thing, right? So you grow the good ones and you suppress the bad ones. That's a really interesting idea. So because of that, we decided to deploy some AI. We started looking into all of the things that these known bioactives in Chardonnay could be useful for, and found a huge potential area in many different areas of human health. So not only in what is normally thought of as being the area that red wine and resveratrol and other things are good for, which is mainly cardiometabolic health, but we started seeing other kinds of things there too, things related to inflammation, things related to the urogenital tract, all kinds of interesting applications that could come out of it. So what we had to do really is we had to look at that and say, well, we have an embarrassment of riches here. Where do we focus, right? So we've decided to focus largely on gut health. That's one of the things that came to the surface again and again and again. And so again, we did some analysis using AI, and what we found was that the predicted effects of Chardonnay constituents on gut health are actually very profound. So we saw some novel effects, which you see there in the yellow section of the ring, and then you see others which are not really well understood, but then you see some positive and predicted associations that are very significant for all of these, both with the phenolics and also with the oligosaccharides. And that's what makes it really interesting, is this combination of both in one food. So when you look at why natural products are interesting, and Harold talked about this a little bit, one of the things that I think is a little hard for people to understand and get their head around is that natural products have this way of working. The term for it is called pleiotropic, which basically means that there's a multitude of mechanisms that natural products work on simultaneously. So with a drug, what they usually do is they try and isolate one enzyme or one protein or one particular pathway, and they just hit that really hard. And it has profound effects that happen very quickly. It also has a lot of side effects because of that. But what natural products do instead is they work with a lot of these natural systems in many different ways, some of them subtle, but nonetheless, they're complementary. And the reason it works that way is because of evolution and evolutionary biology, where these foods have evolved with people, and they work in concert with our natural systems. So we see a whole host of effects that happen all at once as a result of many different constituents in natural products. And in many cases, there's a unifying theme. In this case, it's blood sugar. But we see these kind of effects over and over again in natural products, and Chardonnay is a terrific example of how that works. And it explains why we see so many interesting effects. So a couple of just quick things also to help you understand where some of the differences in red versus white come from, right? One of the things that a lot of people don't know is that red wines are made from fermented grapes. So you take the grapes, you ferment them for a while, it's called maceration, and then that's what you press. That fermented mass is what goes into the wine press, and what comes out of it is further fermented, but there's already some fermentation that takes place. White wines are actually made from fresh fruit. You don't ferment the fruit first. You take the fruit, you put it into the wine press, and you ferment only the juice. So why is that relevant to what we're doing? Well, what it means is that the Chardonnay Marc that's in Vine de Barque chocolate is essentially fresh powdered fruit, right? No fermentation, no transformation. We take all that goodness, everything that's in there, and that's what comes back out for us. The other thing that's interesting about white grapes is that they have a slightly shorter growing season, which means that they actually develop less sugar. Red grapes generally have more sugar than white grapes do, which is also something that I think people don't realize. So they have a little more acid, they have more tannins, they have more phenolic acids and more flavanols. Where what we see in red grapes is more sugar, less acid. However, it has more anthocyanins, which is where you get those nice colors from, and more of the still beans, of which resveratrol is one. So you see a lot of these more complicated products that come from that development of color and other things. So that's how the chemistry in them differs. So the second surprise that we had was regarding sustainability. Now, why is it surprising? I mean, we're talking about an upcycled product, right? We're taking a waste product and we're turning it into something useful. What's really surprising about it is, like I said before, when we first started doing this, Sonomaceuticals had seeds, they had flowers, and they had oils. And that's kind of the traditional way that not just grape products have been treated, but most upcycled products have been treated. Let's break it down, that byproduct that comes out of the manufacturing, and make it into something else. So we're going to take it apart and we're going to do other things with it. Maybe we'll isolate the protein out of it. Maybe we'll isolate some fiber out of it. But it was this kind of deconstruction of that material that everyone went through, and we went through that too. What was surprising is that when everything was all said and done, when the science was done, when we had gone through our manufacturing process, when we looked at what was the best tasting product and everything else, what we discovered is that everything that comes out of the wine press is the best product. What we do is we simply try to preserve that in the best possible way. So all we do when we get that marc that comes out of the press is we remove any foreign material that might be left in there. We get rid of some of the stems. We get rid of any little foreign matter that might have made its way in there. And then we use 100% of the rest. And that was a surprise. So we don't create another waste stream. We don't have to do a lot of further processing to our material. We actually use everything. And that is pretty unique, actually. If you look at the world of upcycling, almost everything else creates either another waste stream, or it takes a lot more processing and everything else to make it, and you're left with something else then is a waste product of the upcycling. We don't do that. So this is one of the most sustainable products you're going to find. The other thing about sustainability that I think is really important is kind of what Harold was saying initially, which is compliance is key, right? So if you want people to use an upcycled product, if it's truly sustainable, it has to be a product that people want, that's desirable, and that actually consumers will respond to very positively. Vine to Bar, which is our first actually designed for consumer product, we've got better than 95% 5-star reviews on it. So we know people like it. We know they're going to keep using it over and over and over again. It also has to have outstanding nutritional value. It doesn't make any sense to try and use upcycled products instead of other products if those products aren't better for you and don't have actually better attributes to it. Then there's authenticity. Instead of greenwashing, which is, where people will add just a little pinch of something that's upcycled, kind of like they used to do with recycled plastics in packaging. I remember when the first few bottles came out that said it contains recycled content. Well, that recycled content in those plastic bottles was like 2 or 3%. It really wasn't meaningful at all. We actually have 15% by weight Chardonnay Marc in our chocolate. That's a huge amount. It's a very significant percentage. And then lastly, like I said, we don't create additional problems or waste because we use 100% of what we get. The other thing that was kind of surprising to us is that it's surprisingly tasty. Now, this isn't quite as surprising as the others because Chardonnay is pretty tasty. But what was interesting about it and what was surprising about it is that it makes other foods taste better. It wasn't just that the Chardonnay Marc itself tasted good. It was its ability to enhance the taste of other foods. So the first one we worked with, of course, was chocolate. And when we first started working with it, I honestly thought that what we were going to have to do is we were going to have to say to people, hey, look, this stuff's better for you than regular chocolate is, right? It's got more fiber in it. It's got lots more flavanols. It has all these things you want. So it may not be quite as good as regular chocolate, but that's okay because this is going to be better for you. That would be the message that we'd have to put out there. I couldn't have been more wrong. It's better than dark chocolates. We have a 65% chocolate, a 65% dark, that actually eats more like a 50% because Chardonnay mitigates that bitterness. Those extra fruit acids and aldehydes that are in there, they give it a subtle character to it that actually makes it taste much better and sweeter, even without the addition of sugar, than regular chocolate does, because it covers up some of those things that make it so that you can't taste the sweetness that's in there. In fact, that observation and that property was so surprising that we've been granted a U.S. patent. We just received notice of allowance here a couple of months ago, and so we'll be adding that patent number to our chocolate bars. So when I look at what WellVine is and what we've managed to do here, the surprise is that we're in a space where it's very difficult to get to. So on the left here, what you see is what they normally call the, kind of the innovation triad, right? You can be any of these two, but you can't be all three. You can be fast and good, you can be fast and cheap, or you can be good and cheap. But it's really hard to get to all three. In fact, I don't know if you can see it right there, but that's a little tiny picture of a unicorn in the middle. So that is very difficult to achieve. I'm not saying we got there necessarily. It took us quite a while and quite a bit of money to innovate. So we didn't break the mold when it came to the innovation triad. But when you look over here at what I would call the perfect trifecta or the triad of food and food innovation, it's hard to be tasty, healthy, and sustainable all at the same time. Those three are very difficult to accomplish. Usually, if you're tasty and healthy, you're not sustainable, or if you're tasty and sustainable, it's not very good for you, or if you're healthy and sustainable, it's not very tasty. But we actually have managed to get all three. So when it comes to food innovation, WellVine is actually something of a unicorn. So what's next? Well, first of all, I think WellVine is what I would term a smart prebiotic. So what do I mean by a smart prebiotic? It encourages friendly bacteria while discouraging the growth of undesirable species. That's a really interesting idea. A lot of prebiotics, it's true that they do actually encourage the growth of lactobacillus or bifidobacteria or other things that you want, but they also have a property called cross-feeding, where they can feed bacteria that you don't want them to actually feed. But because of both the composition of our oligosaccharides and the inclusion of phenolics, we see a more discriminating prebiotic, right? One that discriminates between the good ones and the unfriendly ones. And that's due to the highly diverse composition of fiber and flavonols. We also have a product that's a whole fruit. We're talking about a whole fruit matrix. It's simply been dejuiced. So what does that mean? All the goodness of fruit, but with 70% or so less sugar. And it improves the taste of high phenolic extracts in foods. So other things that are high in those phenolics, flavonoids that you want, they're going to taste better when you combine it. So what kind of applications? Obviously applications in supplements, all kinds of different pills and such. We're also going to be coming out with our own product that will combine the WellVine raw material with cacao. That'll be the first thing that we launch here before long, and other interesting bioactive materials. And then, of course, we think that there'll be a lot of really interesting food applications too, right? Because it makes things taste better, increases the amount of fiber that you have, etc. One of the things that I want you to pay attention to later today when we have lunch is that every item on the menu for your lunch today will have WellVine in it in some way. So that's the level of flexibility and diversity that we think we have in this material. And that's it. So thank you for your time and for your attendance.
So the next person that is going to speak will come to us via Zoom, Ralph Jerome. So usually when I'm in a room, because I worked for 25 years with Mars, I get to say, nobody knows more about chocolate than I do, and I'm telling you this chocolate's good. But in this case, nobody knows more in this room about chocolate than Ralph Jerome. Ralph worked for 30 plus years with Mars Incorporated, and for many of those years it was actually in the chocolate, the global chocolate business, and in fact Ralph ended up leading the R&D division for Mars Incorporated, so he was the global chocolate R&D vice president. And Ralph he's got a master's degree and also a bachelor's degree in food science from Rutgers University. And I have Ralph is the single best innovation leader that I have ever met in the food industry, in terms of being able to span science and technology breakthroughs and then think about what that means in terms of creating new products that not just a few people will like, but a lot of people will like. And how are we doing on getting Ralph up there? All right, good. And then I just wanted to make sure if I should, string this introduction out a little bit longer or not. But nope, there he is. Good. So I'll conclude the intro by saying, in addition to being, I think, the best innovation leader I've ever met in the food industry, nobody has thought more about creating a new category, a paradigm shift or a paradox shift. I was thinking about that too while Scott was talking, in terms of healthy snacking. Ralph has spent literally decades thinking about this, doing this, creating new foods in this category, and Ralph is going to take us through a key part of the trifecta, which is taste, and I'll turn it over to him now. So thank you, Ralph, for being able to be with us.
Hi, everybody. So today I'm going to talk about cracking the code on the flavor of Chardonnay Marc. You've heard the word trifecta quite a bit, and I just want to define what we mean by trifecta. And it's when three elements come together in a successful or noteworthy way. And in this case, we've talked about taste, health, and sustainability. But ultimately, flavor wins by a nose. And notice I said flavor, and I didn't say taste. And I'm going to just go into that for a second. Can I have the next slide? And the reason for that is that flavor includes a number of things. One of those is taste. So flavor is aroma, it's taste, and it's chemosensory stimuli. Now, just think about when you have a cold, a really bad cold, and you can't really breathe through your nose. We always say, I really can't taste that much. You could probably taste sweet and sour, but you really don't get the richness of the food. Or maybe when you had COVID, you didn't taste as much. You didn't get the aroma. So there's an aromatic or a volatile component of flavor that we talk about. Then there's taste, and that's really on the tongue. And you've got sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. Umami is that savory note that we love in things like, brothy foods and Chinese food that, is really well prepared. And then there's chemosensory, and that's really touch sensors, heat sensors, spiciness. When we talk about dryness on the mouth, these are the sensations that you get. That all those three things combined are what we mean as flavor. Now, one of the things, and I'm sure many of you have tried vine to bar chocolate, but there's also this temporal aspect of flavor, how the flavor is released in your mouth. And, when you have a really good dark chocolate, you get these fruity and fragrant notes up front, that we really like. And sometimes when it's a really dark chocolate, you also get some significant bitterness at the end. So you see how you get the upfront taste, and then over time, that's what they mean by temporal, that you get this change and this aftertaste. One of the beauties of the vine to bar chocolate is that with the Chardonnay Marc, you're getting all those fruity floral notes up front. There's a significant tea note in there that is part of the body of the flavor through the whole eat. And then at the end, this sourness comes out, and it's a very pleasant acidic note that sort of masks some of the bitterness at the end. So you've got this effect. And in addition to that, when we put a little salt on the chocolate, and you've got to try the chocolate-coated almonds with the sea salt on them, that salt is super enhanced by the Chardonnay Marc. You get this wonderful umami note as well. So today we're going to cover some work that is done by John Manafo in his fantastic lab at the University of Tennessee. And it's going to get into some flavor analysis. So, with the flavor analysis, we're going to talk about quantifying and understanding what some of those aromatics are. So remember how important they were. We really want to understand and crack the code on what those aromatics are. And we're in the process of cracking the code on what some of those tastings are. We're going to talk a little bit about the techniques that John uses, and we're going to talk about the implication of what makes these wonderful flavors and tastings and aromas in this wonderful product. So the work I mentioned is done at the University of Tennessee. Harold mentioned the Journal of Agriculture and Food Chemistry. A lot of the work has already been published in three publications, peer-reviewed. So this is top-notch science. Can I have the next slide? John is a globally recognized flavor and natural products chemist, and he's an incredible colleague. I've known John for, I bet you 20 years, and he's an amazing collaborator, and he does outstanding work, and he works well and with his team. John's on the bottom under the T. That's John Monapo, and those are some of the folks in his lab. So why is the flavor of Chardonnay Marc so good? And we're starting to understand that, and we're going to go into that now, okay? So it starts with genes, good genetics. Scott was talking about the Chardonnay grape. It's an amazing grape. Chardonnay is the most loved wine in the United States. It's more Chardonnay is made than anything else. The U.S. and the grapes have been, the Chardonnay grape has been cultivated since the Middle Ages. So it goes way back. So there's a great genetic heritage to this grape to begin with. And then there's cultivation. So you've heard cool coastal Chardonnay a number of times, and Scott mentioned that, and Harold mentioned that. It means the grapes ripen slowly, and they develop complex flavors during that ripening. And while they're doing that, they retain a good acidity. And I mentioned that acidity is really important in the way this product performs in food products. And the lunch is going to be amazing because you're going to have it in everything, and you'll see how it complements things. In some cases, it brings out other flavors. In some cases, it masks things. And in some cases, it just has a wonderful flavor on its own. So then there's harvesting. And harvesting is, timing the harvest along with proper handling help maintain cluster integrity, reduce damage, and minimize foreign materials, or what we call MOG, materials other than grapes. So all of these things have been learned throughout the process, and Scott said this goes back a while. All of these steps have been taken to understand what absolutely makes the best Chardonnay Marc. And then there's also MOG removal. So you have the clusters, you have these beautiful grapes, and then there's more quality control, removing leaves, rocks, sticks, just different things that would be in any agricultural raw material. But these are removed, and they're removed to the benefit of the wine as well, and ultimately to the benefit of the Chardonnay Marc. And then this is what's in the press. This is a shot of a press, and inside the press, and you look at this stuff. I mean, it's beautiful. All that good work, the great genes, the great handling, and they end up with these clusters in the press. And then we press it. And the wine goes off to make the wonderful Chardonnay that everybody loves. But look what's left. All those genetics, those genes are still there. A lot of those complex flavor compounds, they're still there. A lot of those aromatics, they're still there. All the good, healthy oligosaccharides are there. So and look at it. It looks beautiful. It's a beautiful food. So that's what's coming out of the press. And then we need to start to turn those pressings into the Chardonnay Marc that we use in our food products. So the first thing we do is we destem it. So we remove the stems that were on the clusters, right? And then we freeze it. And this is an important step, because what we want to do is we want to stop any potential fermentation. This is important for microbial control and for ultimate quality, because once it starts to ferment, as Scott mentioned, we don't want fermentation in these Chardonnay grapes. We want to keep the crispness and the flavors that are present. So controlling that after press material is really critical. And the team has done an amazing job at understanding that and taking care of that right away at the winery. So, and then it's been stabilized, it's frozen, and it's stored, right, until we're ready to dry it. And this drying step is really important because this has, in each one of these steps I mentioned, we have an impact on flavor. If you have the wrong grapes, the wrong genetics, you don't get great flavor. If you don't cultivate it, and we are blessed with cool coastal Chardonnay, so we get great complexity and great acidity. If you don't handle it and treat it well, you're going to have MOG and things like that that are going to have negative impacts down the road. And if you don't dry it right, and that's a stabilization spot, you're going to get burnt flavors, or you're going to get notes that you really don't desire. So there's a lot of flavor development, good and bad, in the drying step. And in addition to that, in addition to the drying, this is a key spot in our process to reduce any potential pathogens or micro issues that have come along the way. So we need to have what we call a kill step. So killing any pathogens. I think it's interesting too. I think that, this is a place where we try to control flavor in that we don't want to over process, but we've also noticed we've done that. We have over processed it occasionally, and sometimes we produce some interesting notes. So there's an opportunity. This could be also a flavoring step as well. And there it is. There's the Chardonnay Marc, star of the show. Doesn't look like much there, but we're going to talk a little bit more about it. So can I have the next slide? So this is the next step. So we take that Chardonnay Marc and we mill it. And this is also important from a sensory perspective as well as a sensory perspective, because by controlling particle size, we can control texture, right? So when we talk about the chocolate, the vine to bar chocolate, we mill the Chardonnay Marc, but then it gets milled further so that we're at about 20 microns. And I know Valerie is there today from Barry Callebaut, and Valerie has really been built this chocolate from scratch and did a brilliant job. And you'll be able to talk to Valerie later, but it's an amazing job that she's done. So after milling, it looks like this. It's a fine powder. And depending on the application, we'll mill it more or less. So if it's going to go into a capsule, the particle size is not super critical. But if we're going to go into a food, we really are very careful about how we mill it. And it's not only the particle size, it's also the particle size distribution. So in other words, if you have a distribution where the mean of the particle size is, let's say, 30 or 40 micron, and let's say what's 40 micron? 40 micron would be like confectioner's sugar, the confectioner's sugar that you use when you're baking or you're dusting stuff. That's about 40 micron. 400 micron would be what granulated sugar would be. So say we get it down to 40 micron. But if you have a bunch of stuff that's at 400 micron and a bunch of stuff at, say, 10 micron, and it averages out to be okay, that's not good. Because you're still going to get that chunky stuff, and you're going to get stuff that's so fine it gets kind of dry and clunky in your mouth. So you need this nice distribution. So we're really careful about the way we mill. Okay, this is an important one as we get into the flavor section and we talk about the great work from the Monafo lab. The Chardonnay Marc is 60% skins, it's 35% seeds, and it's 5% stems. And we're going to talk about some of the aromatic compounds, the volatiles, the things that we talked about earlier, and how they contribute to the overall flavor of the Chardonnay Marc. But remember, 60% skins, so skins are the dominant material here. Then there's seeds. And one of the things that to note is that these three things have different flavor elements. Some of them overlap significantly. Some of them are unique to the individual component. But the important thing is that there's an opportunity there. Depending on the flavor profile we want, we can manipulate these things. We can add more seeds or less seeds or whatever. What is Chardonnay Marc aroma? And I'm going to talk about aroma now, okay? It's bright, balanced, it's fruity and floral, with subtle notes of cooked apple and caramel, with a background of tea, a pleasant tea-like note that blends beautifully into the chocolate, and fatty notes that may be compared to something like let's say a baked fat, like say a croissant. And this is the magic. Well, it's really brilliant science, and the basis of the 3 publications that John's lab has done. I'm going to simplify this a little bit because it's pretty technical, but it's important to understand how thorough this is. I hope you can get out of this how this can be applied for us to make better products going forward because of cracking the code. So let me go through these steps, and I hope you can see that chart. So first, the aroma compounds are extracted. Next, they are isolated, and the volatiles are isolated through a method called solvent-assisted flavor evaporation, or SAFE. Think of it as a distillation, a very gentle distillation under vacuum, so that these very volatile compounds can be lifted out of the liquid they're in and condensed and captured, right? So now John's team has isolated these special compounds that create the aroma of Chardonnay Marc. Now, they're all in that liquid, but we need to identify them. And they use some really amazing techniques to separate, identify the aroma through a sniffing port, and then use GC mass spec to identify what the specific compounds are. So that's the identification piece. So we've extracted the aroma compounds, we've isolated the aroma compounds, then we've identified what they are. But that's not the whole story, because you have to quantify what's there. So then there's a quantification that's done, and this is done via a very scientifically difficult set of words, but I'm just going to say it because it's cool. It's done by stable isotope dilution assays. And what the team is doing is really identifying the amount of the aroma compound that's present. So now they can start to say, okay, I know the amount and I have an idea of the threshold of that flavor. I have to understand now, what is the impact? What's the importance of that compound in the overall flavor? And that's what John's team does, and that's the impact estimate, and that's called an odor activity value is assigned. And that's done by dividing the concentration of the compound that's present divided by the level or the threshold level, the smallest amount that can be present till you get the aroma, right? So that's called the OAV, or the odor activity value. So now we know from this material, and John's team identifies what are the top odor activity values for these different compounds. So they know the compound, they know the impact of the compound, and they say, okay, and they know the concentration, right? So they can then build what's a really important point here is the aroma model. And so they basically assemble the aroma from all the constituents that they know that they think are important. They then take that aroma model and then compare it to the aroma of the Chardonnay Marc itself. And they use a trained sensory panel to do this. So they make up the cocktail of what they think's there. They then use a trained panel to smell that. And then they take the Chardonnay Marc and they do the same. They put it into a solution, and then the sensory panel smells that, and they do a comparison to see, did this aroma model simulate closely the aroma of the Chardonnay Marc? If it does, then we understand the aroma compounds that are present. And it's pretty amazing, right? I mean, you're basically dissecting the flavor and putting it back together and then comparing it to the original piece. Can I have the next slide? So let me give you a couple of examples. This is one of the compounds that's important. It's called beta-ionone. and it has an odor threshold, so the lowest amount that you can, where first is detectable. It's got an odor threshold of 0.021, right? And it is present in the product, in the Chardonnay Marc, at 62 parts per billion, right? So, in other words, that's got a pretty strong impact on the flavor. We know beta-ionone is important, and that has an aroma of floral or violet. This one is called Linalool. It's got a floral and citrus note, and it is present at 36 parts per billion. Now, it's not just the compound being present, and this is what John is trying to communicate here, is that when the way the molecule is assembled also has an impact. So if you look on the right, you'll see that there's a different level of odor threshold. So remember, it's present at 36 parts per billion, but depending on the configuration, it's going to either have 0.8 parts per billion for a flavor threshold or aroma threshold, or 7.4 parts per billion of flavor threshold. In both cases, it's going to have an impact. But in one case, it's got an impact that's 10 times greater than the other one. I think that's pretty cool. So even deciphering what we call the stereochemistry is important here. But in both cases, that impact is present, and it gives a floral citrus note. So this is where it really gets super important, because what's done, and remember, is they assemble the aroma model, right? You can see here, and this is skins, right? So the first thing I want to point out here is, you see the dotted lines? The dotted line is the aroma model, and the dark line is the actual mark. And you can see the precision and how brilliant this team is, because they map over each other. So that tells us that we know what the aroma compounds are in the skins. This is skins, right? So this is 60% of the product. Look how close they got. And what you see here, the dominant things are going to be that fruity notes, the tea, and this grainy, roasty kind of note. Again, you can see the dotted lines and you can see the solid lines. The solid lines are the original product, the seeds. The dotted line is the aroma model, and they're like spot on. Look how close they are. And again, this accuracy is, to me, it's incredible. But look what the seeds are bringing. They're bringing something different. They've got the tea notes, which are common in dried agricultural materials, so that's not hugely significant, I don't think. It actually blends really nicely in foods and things like that. It's pleasant. But you note the fatty notes, that's really a different contribution that's coming from the seeds, and that's not surprising, because the seeds have a significant amount of fat in them, and that's giving this nice baked kind of fatty notes. And this is the stems. And remember, the stems are only in there at 5%, and they're not really contributing that much to the overall flavor in a unique way. And if we look at the next chart, you can see that the stems aren't really bringing that much. This is the three overlaid with each other. The dominant ones is really the skins, and you're getting some uniqueness from the seeds as well. But in summary, the aroma models match the actual aroma very closely. Therefore, we know the specific molecules that make up the aroma of Chardonnay Marc. And skins are providing the fruity, floral, and tea flavors, while the seeds provide some of the fatty notes and the stems are at 5% aren't really contributing all that much, at least in the aroma section. Remember, there's the taste aspects that we're going to talk a little bit about yet later. So this one you're going to be tested on before you leave. These are the compounds. So this is cool though. I have identified the main compounds that deliver the wonderful flavor that we get from Chardonnay Marc. So that gives us the ability to understand if they're there or not when we process, how we can amplify the ones we want, how we can minimize the ones we don't want. And under each one of those compounds, there's an aroma descriptor. So there's tea, and then there's floral and fruity and things like that. So John's team is using similar techniques to understand the taste sensations of the Chardonnay Marc. What we know now is that the Marc is mildly sweet with a pleasant velvety astringency, a sourness which is coming from the organic acids. There's phenolics and glycosides which provide some astringency. And we're also noticing that the Marc seems to be able to enhance other flavors and suppress other notes. So Scott mentioned the patent that has been assigned to us, and we've noticed that the Chardonnay Marc has this effect that it seems to offset some of the bitterness, specifically the bitterness that comes, or the astringency that comes from something like cocoa flavonols, which are very desirable from a health perspective, but are not particularly desirable from a taste perspective. And vine to bar chocolate has 200 milligrams of cocoa flavonols in every serving, and one of the reasons why it tastes so good, even though it has 200 mgs, and you're not going to find a lot of chocolates out there with 200 mgs of cocoa flavonols in it. So when they say dark chocolate's good for you, and they're talking about flavonols, if you don't know the flavanol content, there might be none. But cocoa, vine to bar chocolate has 200 mgs of cocoa flavonols, which is enough to make a health claim all throughout Europe, and it's pending a health claim in the United States. So why aren't there more chocolates with high levels of cocoa flavonols in it? Well, one is that they don't taste great. And the Chardonnay Marc seems to offset that because nobody's complaining about the taste of our chocolate. Actually, as Scott mentioned, our feedback is 5-star 95% of the time. So what are some of the tastings? And remember, I'm talking about the tongue, right? And this is work that John's team is doing now. They apply a lot of the same techniques, but the difference is that, in a simple way of explaining it, is that while the aroma molecules are volatile and aromatic, and you're getting them through the nasal cavity, and you're getting those senses there, the tastings are non-volatile. So you're noticing those on the tongue, right? So he uses a technique called HPLC, and then he applies a lot of the same techniques then to understand what are the important tastings. And what he's finding out is that there's sugars and amino acids that are providing some sweetness. There's organic acids that are providing the sourness. There's flavanols that are providing some astringency and bitterness. There's ions, sodium, potassium, and peptides that are creating some of that saltiness, some of the salty flavor. There's amino acids and peptides, and this is really exciting because this is what's creating the umami notes. And then there's flavonoids and glycosides, which are producing that velvety flavor. So let me talk about some takeaways when we can leave this chart up. So some of the takeaways is Chardonnay Marc has a complex and delightful flavor due to the richness of the aromatics, the taste molecules in the tongue, and then the chemosensory stimuli. So some of that velvetiness is from that. So it's really complex because it's delivering on all three of those things. It imparts not only flavor, but it enhances the flavors that it's paired with. And Ed and Tori are going to take you through a tasting later, and you're going to really get to experience the taste of the chocolate and how it's enhanced. And in addition, having your entire lunch made with Chardonnay Marc in every product, you're going to be able to tell some of those benefits. And I think Chef Gerard has made some products with the Chardonnay Marc, and he probably in the panel will be able to describe some of the benefits and the surprises of some of those pairings and combinations. And I just one brief advertisement. Anything with Chardonnay Marc and salt, and any of the chocolate products with a little bit of salt, it's awesome. So enjoy that. And another takeaway is that the results that we're getting are not an accident. They're a function of great genetics mindful cultivation, and intelligent processing. And from an innovation perspective, there are a lot of levers to pull here, a ton of levers. And a few examples are, changing the timing of the harvest, changing the varietal, changing the processing conditions. We can change the processing conditions. I showed you that we dried the material as particulate matter after it was frozen. We could do it differently. We could pasteurize it. We could liquefy and pasteurize it and dry it different ways. There's a ton of different potential processing techniques that we can use. And very simply, we could change the ratio. You saw the impact of the skins, you saw the impact of the seeds, and you saw the impact of the stems. Changing the balance, the ratio, you can get different flavors. You can also get different health impacts. Probably a lot of the oligosaccharides are in the seeds. A lot of the phenolics are probably in the skins. And depending on what you want to optimize, flavor, health, you can do that and mix and match. So that's pretty much what I had to say, and I'll leave it there. Thank you. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Ralph. That was just awesome. So I wanted to say this now after you sort of had the Ralph immersion experience there. So in addition to, sort of revealing this paradox that we've been talking about and Scott laid out, I flashed up on the screen the Journal of Agriculture and Food Chemistry and how we were featured on the cover of that scientific journal. And really what I was implying and what Ralph just brought to life is that, we're not just revealing a paradox here in the world of new food ingredients in a new model, but, everything you're seeing is world class. So there is nobody who understands flavor and sensory and taste regarding grape products better than this team does. And Ralph and John Manafo represent that in the scientific record that is associated with the publications with the Sonomaceuticals team. Actually, you don't have to take my word for it. You can read the literature and you can see that for yourself. So totally world class. And the next part of the world class piece will be Bobby Holt, who will give a presentation for us. So Dr. Holt will start off and take us down a similar journey on the health side that you just heard from Ralph. So really unpack some really deep and technical natural products chemistry, and instead of their effects on flavor and sensory, she'll talk about their effects on health. So with that, I'm going to introduce Dr. Holt. And she has been at UC Davis for quite a while. She got her bachelor's degree in physiology, and then she got her PhD in nutritional biology. I've worked with her for many years. One of the things that I think you should know about her is that if you have heard about what Ralph was mentioning, these cocoflavanols and their influence on cardiovascular health, Dr. Holt actually did a lot of the human clinical research that underpinned that scientific consensus that these things are quite valuable for cardiovascular health. So she's made quite an impact in the world in that regard. Just building on what Scott was talking about in terms of the whole food approach that Sonomaceuticals is taking, Dr. Holt is her research focuses on dietary components from whole foods, on metabolism and physiologic response, while striving to understand how these foods and their components respond within a diet. And in an Ozempic world now, which is all about cardiometabolic health, actually Dr. Holt has done as much as anyone and continues to do great research on how whole foods and the dietary components within them actually influence cardiometabolic health. So super timely topic given what's going on in the world. And lastly, as she comes up to take the mic, Dr. Holt was the lead author on that Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry article that we've referred to a number of times. So with that, it's a real pleasure to have Dr. Holt talk with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Harold, for that wonderful introduction. And as Harold mentions, I'm here, or as we've talked about, this is a team of teams we're using here for the Chardonnay Marc, or study of Chardonnay Marc. Ralph just gave a wonderful presentation on the sensory team and their research. I'm here representing the health research team, which includes research from myself in the Department of Nutrition, and also from the laboratories of Dr. Daniela Barile and Selena Wong from Food Science and Technology. And let me see if I can get this to work. Woohoo! And as Harold has mentioned, we have just, I guess exactly almost a year ago, published this deep, intense review on the potential of Chardonnay Marc in health in terms of that trifecta of both sensory, health impacts, but still this is a sustainable food system. And so if you want a little more detail on the natural food product chemistry, also some of more details of the sensory attributes that Ralph had just discussed about, please refer to this review. What we did review in that review is that, importantly, Chardonnay Marc has a number of bioactives that are not defined as essential nutrients, yet they can have considerable impact on cardiometabolic health. As we had outlined, the intake of grape products, such as the berries themselves, wine, freeze-dried powders, and the Marc itself, have a number of positive impacts on cardiometabolic health that are outlined above, which we have also studied in a pilot trial currently being done. So potential bioactives of interest within the Chardonnay Marc, as Scott had mentioned, come from the skin and the seeds. And this can include phenolics and a number of complex carbohydrates. And bringing up the French paradox again, when discussing these great bioactives, it's important to note that the key difference between red and white wines is the extent of the extraction of those bioactives into the wine itself. So therefore, the so-called French paradox, to give you a little more detail, was the observation of an inverse association between the increasing fat intake from dairy, but still having a lower cardiovascular mortality in the French population. The authors at that time hypothesized that it was the alcohol content, which is known to have an increase in your good cholesterol or HDL cholesterol. But they also demonstrated that higher intakes of alcohol were associated with reduction of the activation of platelets, which is your key cell that clots and also is involved in a heart attack. So it wasn't until the following year that researchers from UC Davis, so it's our fault, I guess you could say, first proposed that the apparent French paradox may not only be due to the alcohol content of wines, but the phenolic content. And that's where we kind of came about that red wine was healthier. However, science kind of tells another tale, because it's natural products such as flavonols with known health benefits that we now have, like I said, studying cocoa flavonols, know are beneficial over the past few decades, are actually present in similar, if not greater amounts in the skin and seeds of white varietals compared to that of the red varietals. And you can see that outlined here in red, in which the seeds of Chardonnay are almost double the amount in total flavonols. And just to give you a little detail why this is important, that intersection between the gut health and brain, is that I want to introduce you to the concept of how diet affects the whole body, which is a big research focus of mine. First, through the direct impacts of nutrients or bioactives upon absorption in the gut, and then into the circulation. And secondarily, through its impact and interaction with the microorganisms living within us, and which are known collectively as the microbiota. In the past decade, we have had an increased appreciation of the impact of a healthy diet on the microbiome. This includes the maintenance of commensal or beneficial bacteria, the promotion of healthy balance of microbiome-derived metabolites that they produce from dietary components, along with the maintenance of gut and immune health and function. Moreover, through the secretion of hormones, dietary components, and microbial-produced metabolites, these all work together so that the gut, brain, and cardiovascular systems communicate with one another in order to maintain physiologic homeostasis. Oopsie. Therefore, it's important to understand that whole foods and diets provide a complex array of nutrients and natural products that can impact health in a multitude of ways. Therefore, to best understand the impacts of food or an ingredient on health and within a dietary pattern, that food needs to be characterized, which is what we're currently working on. So for Chardonnay Marc, our team's research to date has focused on characterizing the phenolics and fiber. And just a few definitions here. Total fiber consists of non-digestible carbohydrate and ligand. So diets poor in fiber lead to reduced diversity of the gut microbial populations and have produced a shift in microbial metabolite production that reduces the protective layer within the gut, or mucin, increases gastrointestinal permeability, and also gastrointestinal inflammation, and also systemic inflammation as well. So overall, the prebiotic activity of fiber is dependent on its structure, with the breakdown of fiber into monosaccharide units that's dependent on the specific bacteria population and specific genes of that bacteria. Therefore, a higher diversity of monosaccharides also translates into a diverse commensal bacterial population. So oligosaccharides are a type of non-digestible carbohydrate that have a low degree of polymerization, defined as 3 to 15 monosaccharide units, yet are a diverse class of compounds that can be fermented by the select bacterial species. So these, as Harold had previously mentioned, and I believe Scott as well, they are naturally presented in milk or mammal milk, and in many plants after synthesis or hydrolysis of higher polysaccharides or glycolipids and proteins. And then the Barilla lab is what they have done is using advanced analytical techniques, they have characterized these monosaccharides. They've done extensive work on this, particularly from the Chardonnay Marc, in order to assess their potential health benefits. Pictured here, you can see the mass spec profile of the oligosaccharides. To date, they have found over 40 unique oligosaccharides. And then with this one sample, you can see taller peaks. These indicates that oligosaccharides are of higher abundance or more present within any particular Chardonnay Marc sample. And the most abundant of these oligosaccharides tend to contain a combination of hexose and pentose, which may be generated from a certain polysaccharide found in the cell wall of grapes called arabinogalactan, if I didn't butcher that too much. So this is important as beneficial bacteria, such as bifidobacterium, have been reported to utilize oligosaccharides derived from arabinogalactans, making these oligosaccharides particularly interesting for potential prebiotic applications. And indeed, work performed by Dr. Ashita Shah, also at Food Science and Technology Department, demonstrated that a number of oligosaccharides isolated from the Chardonnay Marc can be utilized by the commensal or beneficial bacteria, such as bifidobacteria and lactobacilli, but not by the pathogenic bacteria, which was also demonstrated by analyzing the spent media. You can see this graph on the lower right-hand corner and the arrows. So analyzing the spent media via mass spectrometry, they could show a selective consumption of these oligosaccharides by the bacteria. And in addition to oligosaccharides, the Wang lab have also analyzed several varietals for their phenolic content to include the flavin-threols. So while pictured on the left-hand side is several varietals being measured for their epicatechin and catechin content, and these were all harvested in 2021. So you can see that all varietals have some sort of amounts of epicatechin and catechin, but what's kind of exciting is the two green and blue bars in the left panel on the right-hand side that represents Chardonnay Marc, and you can see that it is higher in epicatechin and catechin. And then in the left panel are a number of procyanidins, which are basically units of epicatechin and catechin. They're larger, known as procyanidins. They're polyphenols that tend not to be absorbed, but may be consumed by the bacteria in the lower gut. But what was interesting is that for Chardonnay Marc, which is that blue bar on the right panel, the first one there, it's particularly enriched in procyanidin B1, which is a dimer of catechin and epicatechin. And why does this matter? Mainly because the flavonols are of considerable interest, as in just the last year, an expert panel convened to develop dietary recommendations for the daily intake of flavanols. As Harold mentioned, after decades of research of cocoa flavanol intake on cardiometabolic health, we now have substantial enough research to actually propose a dietary recommendation for a dietary bioactive, and that has not been done before. So this positions upcycled foods such as Chardonnay Marc as a valuable ingredient, particularly as a source of flavonols, to aid individuals in obtaining that dietary recommended level, which is right now potentially set at 400 to 600 milligrams per day. And I've been talking about Chardonnay Marc flavonols in isolation, or these bioactives in isolation. As we move forward with assessing their potential health impacts of these foods, we need to appreciate that these foods are in a complex food matrix. And their nutrient and bioactive composition, as well as their interactive effects with one another, need to be determined. For both oligosaccharides and phenolics, to include polyphenols such as the flavonols, they're not found in isolation with food, but can also be bound to proteins, lipids, and polysaccharides. So when focusing on these bioactives, we need to understand that under physiologic conditions, they may first be released from the matrix and then absorbed in the upper gut. However, they could also be bound and moved to the lower gut, where they are exposed to the bacterial populations and also can be fermented as other indigestible substrates by the gut microbiota. These non-extractable phenolic acids that we call, or NEPA, are typically not captured in most food analyses that particularly use solvent-based extracts. Instead, you need to do additional extraction steps, such as with the aqueous solvents that capture them. So the Wang Lab has been doing this type of work and measuring the extractable and the non-extractable phenolics. As pictured here, the non-extractable phenolics can represent a substantial portion of the phenolic acids within the Marc. And so it may contribute to the additional bioactivity of the Marc that we have yet to determine. Yet adding further complexity when assessing the potential health effects of these foods, we also need to keep in mind that even the extractable phenolic acids can have impacts on the gut microbiota and vice versa. Pictured here is the 24-hour metabolism of epicatechin, demonstrating the initial absorption and associated primary metabolites within 2 hours of intake. That's represented by the first peak here. It is also followed by the second peak you see that's a little shorter and broader. This occurs about 6 hours later after intake, and it represents the presence of microbial-derived metabolites from epicatechin. And so these were not either absorbed or they were recirculated into the gut through to the enterobiliary hepatic circulation. And the physiologic effects of this metabolism, which is similar for a number of phenolics, has been observed with both blueberry and cocoa powder intake, where you see an initial peak at that 1 or 2 hour time point, which represents the initial uptake from the gut in the circulation. And then it's followed by 6 hours later an increase in vascular function, which also potentially represents the increase of vascular function after the presence in the circulation of the secondary microbial-derived metabolites. So going into our own research, we have observed a similar response. So in our current pilot trial, we provided 3 healthy male adults a beverage containing 7.5 grams of a high flavanol cocoa, providing 563 milligrams of flavanols. In addition, in that beverage, we added 4.5 grams of Chardonnay Marc, providing an additional 160 milligrams of flavanols, essentially, for a total of 722 milligrams of flavanols. We observed a significant increase, represented in the right panel here, of microvascular function as measured by the Framingham Reactive Hyperemia Index, which is a measure of microvascular function, but also is related to cardiovascular risk factors. What's interesting is you're still seeing that 2-hour time point, the increase in vascular function, and also at that 6-hour time point. So we're seeing both the primary metabolism and the response potentially 6 hours later when you have the presence of the gut microbial metabolites. In addition, we have also observed an increase in what's known as prostacyclin levels after the intake of 220 milligrams of flavanols from chocolate. So that's the panel on the left-hand side. This prostanoid is known for both its vasodilatory effects, so it helps increase vascular function, and it also has antiplatelet effects. So that initial French paradox study I was showing you that's sort of like an aspirin. We have also observed a decrease in platelet reactivity, represented in the white right panel, 2 and 6 hours after the same intake of the chocolate. And we're glad to, so far, see confirmatory data with the same cocoa and Marc beverage providing 722 milligrams of flavanols. And that so far we're seeing a reduction in collagen-stimulated platelet aggregation 6 hours after intake of that beverage. So although still preliminary, this initial data set suggests of differential effects occurring between 2 and 6 hours after the intake of cocoa flavanols with Chardonnay Marc. So we aim to further explore what this potential going on between that differential effect. And in summary, Chardonnay Marc is a rich source of number of bioactives to include phenolics and oligosaccharides that can positively impact both cardiovascular and gut health. So preliminary results today suggest that the incorporation of WellVine Chardonnay Marc as a food ingredient may positively impact cardiometabolic and gut health. And we look forward to continue research on that end. And like I said, this is the team-and-team approach. I represent the health team, which is myself and Dr. Keene from the Department of Nutrition, and also a number of members of the Food Science and Technology from the Barilla and Wang laboratories. Thank you.
You know, there's been a sort of a building theme between talks here, so just building, you know, we've heard some words, paradox, trifecta. After Dr. Holt's talk, I just wanted to take the opportunity to comment that that we have a really nice trifecta of natural products chemistry going on, but I wanted to wait to say that until after you saw her talk. But, you know, with Ralph, you saw really world-class flavor chemistry. Dr. Holt presented some world-class oligosaccharide chemistry from Daniela Barilla's lab, and also some world-class phenolics and flavanol chemistry, polyphenolics chemistry from Dr. Wong's laboratory. So we have a nice trifecta of natural products chemistry, which makes me really happy. In any case, I think also what we're seeing, and you know, Aaron will talk to us more about how to make this real, but you're starting to see how the different parts come together to form not only a whole, but something that's greater than the whole. So we have the whole Marc, and then we have like this synergistic burst of flavor and health with the chocolate that comes together, and we'll certainly talk more about that. So we are now going to move to the panel discussion. And this is going to be really cool because we're going to hear from people who really bring it, together. from the food perspective. So I'm going to invite Ed to come up, Ed Klein, to come up and introduce the panel that he'll be moderating. And I'm not sure if Ralph is going to be able to join or not. He isn't going to be able to. So, yeah. All right. Very good. So Ed leads the marketing effort for Vine to Bar and has had a long career in marketing and branding with Coca-Cola and others, and ran his own business, et cetera. And so it's a real pleasure to have Ed here to moderate this panel that's really going to bring things to our plate. So, Ed.
Thank you, Harold. I actually think we're going to need a couple more chairs up here. So why don't I do this? Why don't I'll introduce the panel one by one, and as I do, please come on up. And I'm going to start with Russ Anderson. Russ, since founding Anderson Advanced Ingredients, Russ and his team have been renowned for providing novel, efficacious, functional food solutions to the natural products industry, helping countless R&D projects move from concept to reality. Led by legacy products Cherry Pure, Moisture Lock, and Fiber Smart, the industry knows they can always count on Russ and his team for premium, unique raw materials that will move the marketing needle. Russ is a father of four and can be found coaching baseball or on the golf course when he's not making sure the supply chain is flowing smoothly for his clients. So Russ, come on up. And I'm going to ask Russ, grab a chair with you. Exactly. Next, I'm going to ask Valerie Benoit to join us. Valerie is the Senior R&D Project Manager for Specialty and Innovation at Barry Callebaut. Valerie's been working at Barry Callebaut for 20 years and has a bachelor's degree in biochemistry from the University of Montreal. And Valerie is also known to us, as Ralph already alluded to, pretty much the creator of Vine to Bar. So we're really excited to have Valerie here and looking forward to hearing what she has to say about the potential. We also have Aaron Judge with us, who we already had a wonderful introduction. So Aaron, grab a seat here. And last but not least, and a favorite of many in the world of food, is a chef. We're going to hear from Chef Gerard Viverito. Chef Gerard is a classically trained chef and culinary educator who is passionate about sustainable food practices. He's dedicated a large part of his career to functional cooking, often using just a few simple ingredient swaps to enhance a recipe's health benefits. His commitment to sustainable food practices extends to his role as corporate chef and culinary advisor to Blue Nalu, as well as being the director of his food-based catering company, Gerard's Catering. Through his company, he is very active with the community of local farmers. And early in his career, Chef Viverito spent many years as an executive chef here in California, the Virgin Islands, and 3 years in Spain, France, and Italy, and that is making all of our mouths water. And I'll ask Chef to come on up and grab a chair as you join us. While Chef Gerard's coming up, thank you again for the introduction, Harold, my background. I just wanted to also share a little bit of my experience as we get into this. As a lifelong marketer, as Harold alluded to, it's always important for me to understand the voice of the consumer. Ultimately, who's eating our products? What are we designing them for? We've talked about the great trifecta that we have. And, of course, when we're talking about the first commercialization here with Vine to Bar, indulgence is a big part of it. And as Scott alluded to earlier, we were so pleasantly surprised about the taste. But it came out of the voice of the consumer. We were doing focus groups early on in the product development. We had people taste it. And I was sitting next to Ralph behind the curtain, as we all have seen. And one of the consumers actually said, "This is incredible. This is 65% dark chocolate." And the words literally came out of the consumer's mouth. That really tempers those bitter notes of what I'm used to with dark chocolate. Lo and behold, here we are. That language is on the packaging. And, of course, it's the basis of the patent that we've talked about, which is that we have something so extraordinary that it actually makes a great food taste even better. So let me, on that note, start our conversation with Valerie, who actually helped create that product. Valerie, what surprised you the most when you started to work with the Chardonnay Marc?
Well, when we first started to work with the Chardonnay Marc, we know what we know, we don't know what we don't know, so it's very trial and error. We tried, how is it going to work on our equipment? Is it going to taste good? How is it going to affect the color, the texture, and all of that? So, we started the process by, let's just try 5% in the formulation. Let's just see what happens. And it worked really well. So we increased, 10%, 15%, 20%, and we just sort of played with the material. And my first surprise was how the texture was, how smooth it was, how creamy the texture was. And the reason I'm surprised by it is because one of the common defects in chocolate when you add fibers is that it can get sticky. You can find some grittiness also in it. So you have to be careful of how much fiber you're going to add in chocolate. And that wasn't the case at all. So, and everyone who tasted the chocolate, how smooth it is. That was my first surprise using the Chardonnay Marc. And I would say that my second surprise was how good it tasted. After 20 years in chocolate, I have tried hundreds of ingredients. They don't always taste good, and they don't always pair well with chocolate. That wasn't the case. It pairs really well. It's a great combination. So that was my second, surprise, is that how good it tasted. And my third surprise was, as we continued developing and the chocolate and trying different cocoa content, different fiber content, different sugar content in the chocolate, is we decided to go a little further in the development by adding the Acticoa cocoa powder, which is a berry calbo cocoa powder that is high in flavanol. And to be honest, I was skeptical. I thought, this is going to be too much. It's going to be too much, polyphenol. It's going to taste astringent. It's going to taste too bitter. I was afraid that it wouldn't taste great, and it was the opposite. Adding the Chardonnay Marc to the chocolate actually made it taste better. So that was, a huge surprise for me.
Was it a paradox?
Yes.
And were there any specific considerations that you went through to sort of optimize the formulation, in addition to the things that you're talking about, as you kept going?
I mean, we've tried different prototypes, and we've tried even a 20% Chardonnay Marc, and we decided that 15% was the best tasting one. Even though it worked at 20%, we went back, to 15% because that was the optimal for the taste. In my experience, when you develop chocolate, the further you move away from what is a typical chocolate that consumers are used to, the more risk you take that it's not going to taste great. And, taste is king. That's the biggest concern. It has to taste good. It doesn't matter what claims you can make on the chocolate if it doesn't taste good. So, but there weren't any, there were a few challenges working with the product because of the seeds in it. It is a bit more difficult to refine on lab equipment, not in the factory where we have, equipment that is capable of handling this kind of material. But no, it was a really, for me, it's a happy story. It's not always a happy story when you develop chocolate with new ingredients. Sometimes it's not that great. But to me, it was, a happy story.
Sure. Thank you so much. Russ, in your world, we've got a couple of ways to think about this. And similar to Valerie, when you first were starting to work with the material, what sort of surprised you about it? And importantly, I think, from your perspective, when you're looking for new materials, what characteristics do you look for where you can sort of predict maybe success?
Yeah, when we were first introduced to the material, we were very surprised that basically every box was already checked. Usually we get introduced to a new material from a random source, and it's got a lot of work to do, but Scott and his team have been at this a long time, and they've got it ready to go and teed up to go B2B, which is our world. We sell to brands and factories and companies like Valerie's that are putting it into products. And when we're looking to launch a new product, we're basically looking for 5 boxes to be checked before we go. In this marketplace, natural products, first thing we're looking for is clean label. We're not going to launch anything that's not clean label. Clean label covers all the certifications we've looked at. Clean label means, of course, 100% natural. You want it to be environmentally friendly harvested, solvent-free. You want it to have as few pesticides as possible, everything else. So it checks every clean label box, and you can get it certified with as many certifications as possible. It starts with the basic kosher and halal certifications, but then you keep going into the grain-free certifications, vegan certifications, NSF, Informed Sport, FODMAP friendly. Basically, as many certifications as you can get is going to get you further down the road. And WellVine's already checked that box. They're there and teed up to do a lot more. Second thing we look for, it's got to have a great marketing story that's going to resonate with consumers. We could have the best ingredient in the world, but if consumers can't share stories about it with their friends and be proud to be consuming the product, they're not going to, the ingredient's not going to be as successful as it should be otherwise. You know, it can be a sea cucumber harvested off the coast of Okinawa in pristine waters, or mushrooms grown in the shade of the Himalayas or something, but it's got to have a good marketing story, and WellVine's got that. You know, there's nothing better that resonates with people than the story of Coastal Chardonnay and Napa and everything else, so they've checked that box. The third thing you're looking for, in an ingredient, it's got to have something that makes it efficacious, some sort of phytonutrient that you can hang your hat on to show the benefits of the ingredient, and we've spent the last hour looking at all those, whether it's the catechins or the flavonoids or the polyphenols. WellVine's well positioned in that space and has many phytonutrients that can hang on from the oligosaccharides, and many more to be tapped into. So they checked that box. Fourth box you're looking to check is basically your own science behind those phytonutrients. And with the UC Davis group, they've done a lot of the science already, so that box is checked. The more science you have on your own ingredient, the more successful it's going to be, the better price point you can charge. So you can charge a premium for products that have their own science rather than just piggybacking on someone else's science. And then the fifth thing you have to do for success is to have your supply chain extremely buttoned up. The supply chain covers everything from the agriculture side into the processing. And it doesn't end there, because once you've got it processed, you've got to have all your regulatory documentation together, regulatory quality testing. Everything has to be buttoned up, and then you have to distribute it properly and warehouse it properly and all of that. So WellVine is teed up, ready to go, and has checked all these boxes. And then from there, once you've dialed in your marketing message, you've got the price point right, you're on the path to success. And then once people start trying your product and the word gets out, it just snowballs and you have a successful ingredient in the marketplace.
Fantastic. Thank you, Russ. Given that we're talking now about, so we've got an ingredient that Valerie was able to work with and create a better tasting chocolate. We're ticking all the boxes for further development. We have a chef here who is working with the material and can bring a perspective that all of us like to try at home, but we know we're not really trained professionals. But when you think about the ingredient, chef, why do you think other chefs would be interested in it, and what excites you about working with it, and where do you see the potential for other ranges of creation for the material?
All right. Excuse me. Well, first off, chefs don't have time to think. Not that we don't think. I mean, I overthink everything. Maybe it's neurodivergence. Maybe it's whatever it is. But we want function. We want ease of use in a kitchen. A few things that we saw during the pandemic, as in the food service in general, was traceability of foods. Like, where does it come from? Our supply chains were shot. One of the things that excites me, and I know I've spoke to some of my colleagues and people in the industry, is, here's a great food source item that has excellent provenance. I mean, wine country. Who doesn't think of wine country when they think of food? And now we can think of really, truly healthful. Traceability of supply chains. I mean, as you saw up there, everything is easy to find and where it comes from. So we want to create. We want to experience. We want the food to be, sensual and exciting and visually pleasurable. And when working with this product, I will talk about a little later, the range of products I use it in, it's to, borrow a term from, my last presentation I just listened to, it's an easy hack. Here's a way to cut bitterness without adding extra fat or salt to dishes. There's no perceptible effects on the food. I know as a chef, when I create something and then I try to change it and make it more functional, the kiss of death to me is if I changed or altered the texture or the perceived mouthfeel or added a taste component in there. I don't want to alter the aromatics of it and the overall flavors. And, this didn't do it. This is so super exciting. It gives chefs something to talk about. It gives maybe even an added premium to a dish. Like, we're always trying to figure out how to make this dish more valuable to a customer. And with such a simple add-in, I mean, some of you have tasted this product, some of you have no idea how easy it is, but it truly can just be measured out, added in, and I had not needed to adjust any of my formulations, which, if you want excitement, I mean, that excites me beyond belief. I took it into my kitchen with a healthy dose of skepticism. Why wouldn't I? I'm skeptical of everything, even the weather. What did it do to my tomatoes? Did it change my acid? Did it change my sugar levels? So when I kept playing with this, I discovered dozens of applications. I kept delving deeper, and I found that it really just improved the performance and the flavor of a lot of the foods that I worked with. And so many times we hear that we have to eat something. And I think if there was anything that excites me most about this, now this is something I want to eat, right? And it's an easy way for dietitians or people to get their clients excited about food. It's no longer, oh, you have to do this, you should do this. When they taste it, the flavor differences and the lack of, perceptible textural differences, you're going to want to eat it. And it just, that's exciting. To have a chef make a dish where the customer wants to eat it, I mean, the proof is in the pudding right there. So
Terrific. And that's a great segue. Aaron, we just heard from you about the diversity of foods that you're encouraging and sort of all the ways that different foods provide benefits. When you think about WellVine and Vine to Bar for your patient population, how do you think about where it fits and how you would recommend it?
Absolutely. So, like Chef was just talking about, it's unique to find what we could consider a supplement to the diet. So this is a unique supplement in that it's whole food derived, but it is still a supplement that we're adding onto these whole foods in front of us. Typically that's going to be in a capsule, like a typical supplement, or hidden, right? We hide it deep in a smoothie. We hide the collagen in the coffee. You hide things because they don't offer flavor or value beyond the health benefit. But with WellVine, and we see it in Vine to Bar, where again it added more value to the chocolate itself, added flavor with what the chef was talking about, like having a supplement that my patients not only could say, okay, I'm going to eat my bar of chocolate every day, which is a beautiful recommendation, but also I can cook with this. I can replace maybe the sugar I add to my pasta sauce with this. Maybe it adds some value in terms of that flavor profile and cuts the acidity. I'm not a chef, but if we can add things to different recipes that we're making and getting that benefit, it feels a lot less like a medication they're taking, like the capsule that they're taking as a supplement, and feels more like a true whole food source. And there's a lot of value to that to patients. particularly in my population. We mentioned irritable bowel syndrome a bit. If you're not familiar with it, irritable bowel syndrome and functional dyspepsia kind of go together alongside the GI tract. But these aren't inflammatory conditions like you see with Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. Those conditions, there's a clear inflammatory marker, there's inflammation that's happening, it's treated a specific way, the medications can be highly effective, and people go into remission. For irritable bowel syndrome and functional dyspepsia, we don't have strong treatments. The medications are not actually that efficacious. Don't tell anyone I said that to come after me, but they're not that great if you look at the data, and they don't always improve all symptoms that people are experiencing or even longer outcomes. There's no such thing really as remission of IBS. What we do know with more research in IBS that what people are presenting with is a dysbiotic gut profile. So we know, okay, there's more of these maybe pathogenic bacteria present, or just less diversity, fewer of these good bacteria present. And we know that in some, especially our post-infectious IBS population, which is a large majority, there is increased intestinal permeability. And so whenever I'm thinking about, again, utilizing food and seeing a product come on the market that has not just a fiber source, like I love the idea of combos, but it has these polyphenols that might be able to improve that makeup of bacteria, that may help with that intestinal permeability, healing, and recovery, which hopefully we can prove in the future. That is extremely valuable to them because they know not only am I eating something, not only does it taste good, not only is it a food source I can be excited about, but this actually might be really improving what's driving my symptoms and what I'm experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And it's very exciting when you've been told there's nothing we can do over and over again, or the medications you're offered really don't have a lot of great efficacy. So.
Terrific. Thank you, Erin. We've been talking about it as both a food and as a dietary supplement. Russ, when you're looking for new ingredients, how do you discriminate between the food and supplement applications, and where do you how do you make that discrimination and see potential?
Yeah, we've got two divisions in our company. We've got a food division and a nutraceutical division. And all of our customers in the food world, they're dying to make claims and have functional products like they have in the nutraceutical world. And everyone over here in the nutraceutical world is dying and craving the volumes and the revenues of the food world. So in the middle, you have functional foods, and that's where most of these therapeutic ingredients are headed. And WellVine falls into that functional food path where it can benefit as a nutraceutical for different applications and more health-specific benefits. And then it functions well as a food, as we've heard from the team here. And it's right there in the middle, functional food. And it's basically food to make us all healthier and better, and it's perfectly positioned between both.
Terrific. Well, let's jump back to Chef then, because let's talk about some of those specific applications. We've had speculation on a few fronts about, well, what would you do with it, and how would you take it? I like Erin just talked about putting it in sauce. I actually happen to make. I'm not a very good chef, but I like to play one on TV sometimes, and I actually made a mole with it the other day, which I thought was really interesting. It gave a lot to it, and I like to make smoothies with the powder, but that is literally scratching the surface. Chef, what are you doing with it, and what do you see as some of those potential applications?
I mean, the easy way out is to say savory, sweet, and functional sports nutrition. I mean, that pretty much covers everything. But I sought performance possibilities, and I confirmed applications. I was fortunate enough about, 2 months ago, I think we're in New York City. Ed, Scott, Ralph, and myself got to sit down in, the Hell's Kitchen area of New York City, and I brought down a bunch of items, and I brought down control groups versus, ones with the add-in of 4.5 to 7 grams of this WellVine powder, and I confirmed its taste and I guess probably increased performance, for lack of a better word, in items such as lemon vinaigrettes, barbecue sauces, tomato sauces, spiced nuts, a rhubarb compote, all items that are traditionally registered as bitter on the tongue. Fruit leather, in which, you could make a functional fruit leather for kids. I know when I had my 2 kids growing up through school, I used to make fruit leather for them all the time and put it in their lunch boxes. I've made an upgraded chocolate truffle using the Barry Callebaut chocolate with the addition of vitamin B3 in it, and there was no perceptible, I think it tasted better. And I came across some mistakes. I made a pan or a nut coating. I usually do like a spiced nut for salads or for hors d'oeuvres or anything, and I thought, well, I don't necessarily like the way this tastes, but then I took it back to my confectionery lab and I threw it in my panning machine and just kept throwing charges of chocolate over it. I wish I could have shown that to Ralph, because, you want to talk about panning, just look at M&Ms. And I just made it even better. It's just, so it may not be on the finished product. It could be something underneath the finished product. And like I said, it's easily hidden, and it just makes everything taste better. So I think the range will keep growing. If you all want to send me more kilograms of the product, I will keep giving you larger range. But no, I really enjoy playing with it, and I think it's on the way. I think most of my cooking, as you might have heard from my brief bio, is I spent many years in the Mediterranean. My father, shipped me off when I was 15 to Italy because he thought I needed to learn a work ethic. And sadly, I've been type A and haven't stopped working since, so I need to find some downtime. I lived in the Caribbean for years, and I found that it works in all kinds of cuisines. And I'm very well versed in French, Italian, Spanish, Caribbean. I lived in Singapore for a little while, so I know a little bit about, true Chinese cooking and some Malay styles and Thai. And I see it being able to be utilized in about every single cuisine that I have touched. So I even beverages like you mentioned, smoothies, I don't think that we have found the ceiling yet. So that goes also back to what really excites me.
Awesome, thank you. And so Valerie, with that in mind too, I know your focus with Barry Callebaut and innovation and created for us this chocolate. There are other applications of the chocolate within the world of flavors and ingredients. What categories and spaces do you see as truly interesting potential for both the Marc and for this now combination of Acticoa with WellVine?
Well, there's chocolate chips for bakery, like at home baking, where you're making cookies and muffins. I think it would be great. Bakery application in general. I've seen upcycling of material for like making muffins, not just chocolate. For the chocolate also, so we've created a chocolate that you can eat like as is. But there's also like all the nutrition bars out there. These companies don't always have equipment to crystallize chocolate properly. And they will typically use what we call a chocolate compound, which is just like a chocolate, but it's made with vegetable fat other than cocoa butter. So I think that this could be a really great application, is just making like a confectionery coating with this superfood and Acticoa for like nutrition bars. I think that would be, a great combination, and it would just boost polyphenol. It's upcycling, it's plant-based, rich in fiber. So I think it would work really well with like nutrition bars and product like that.
Terrific. We're going to ask a question, I think, for each of you at this point too, and then I want to open up the floor for questions for the panel. I know you're saving some questions from the other presentations, but with this very unique panel, we'd like to entertain some questions for them from the audience. But before we do that, when you think about just the trifecta, here we've got this extraordinary idea of taste, sustainability, and health. Just for each of you, how does that affect your thinking about the ingredient overall, and in thinking about those applications that we've talked about? Let's start with Russ.
Yeah, from the trifecta, we love the sustainability story first because that's how we're going to base that as the ingredient cell. Sustainability goes a long ways. The upcycle story is great. You can get certifications tied to that. But then the health benefits, that's where you're going to make your hay on the nutraceutical side for sure, and then probably on the food side as well. Again, get your active component that's going to be identified in your certificates of analysis that you can hang your hat on and test it out every time, and then tie your studies into that. And we know it's healthy. If you got a certificate of analysis to back it up that's consistent every batch, you're going to have customers that are going to use it and use it for the rest of their lives probably. So we're teed up.
Great. Valerie.
One of the things that I like about Chardonnay Marc is that it's only one ingredient having all these qualities. You know, when you make chocolate, you want to try to keep the formulation simple. It's easier for the factories also. So having one ingredient with all these attributes, you know, the upcycling, the story about upcycling, the polyphenols, plant-based, again, really important. It's one of the biggest trends out there is positioning product as plant-based and all these fibers. So I don't have to use like 4 different ingredients to obtain what I'm looking for. I just need one ingredient in the formulation. So I think it's great.
Thank you. Erin?
A great follow to that, but definitely on the health side is my favorite side of the trifecta. But thinking about the potential use in other conditions, as we have kind of alluded to or talked about in practice, I just see a lot of gaps in being able to leverage true nutrition in a simple way, because again, that rainbow is hard to get to for some people, for autoimmune disease, for metabolic disorders, for GI, just for that range of conditions. I think there's a lot of interesting application, and even if we don't have the exact answers of can this treat this autoimmune disease, like we probably will never have that. Maybe we will. It's very hard to study in those populations, but what we can do is know that we're adding something in a simple way that's safe and can be supportive. And for me as a dietitian, that is what I have to work with from an evidence-based perspective, is how can I utilize something simple, safe, and effective to support the person in front of me. And maybe that means we reduce the risk. Maybe that means they heal faster. Maybe that means less medications. That would be incredible. But at the end of the day, we know we're at least using something that we can trust and, again, truly leverage.
Awesome. Thank you. Chef.
All right. I'll try to keep this brief. But as a modern day chef, I have to wear many hats, or I guess maybe in my kitchen toques, so to speak. So I'm always trying to juggle cost, function, taste, environmental concerns. So, you know, all of that is sustainable. Yes, you can't just think of the product. Yeah, it's really nice and sustainable that we're keeping this out of a landfill or we're keeping it out of composting, but sustainability also encompasses, you know, environmental factors, cost, health benefits to the population. So my purchasing decision has to be based on that, and I want to believe in it. I want my customers to be able to believe in it as well and know that I can just put it in most applications, have a supercharged product and, you know, a long life cycle on it. Selfishly, from a health benefit perspective, I love that I can put it in a sports bar or on a race day nutrition. Maybe for some of you who are formulators out there have products, you know, 15% mass replacement that not only improves taste but adds healthy fibers without gastrointestinal distress, which, let me tell you, is never good on race day. You know, and as a chef or a relentless triathlete, I'm a confectioner as well. You know, I take this trifecta and I'd love to, you know, partner up with people and come up with indulgent sports nutrition. I cannot tell you how much, for those of you who have no idea what kind of garbage is out there on the shelves from these goos and all these replacements, it's absolutely horrifying. Or recovery treats. You know, I call it nutritional decadence or functional decadence. I can't think about how cool it would be the next time I'm grinding away in a 140.6 mile race to be able to reach into my little bento box and pull out a truffle that's not only going to regulate my blood sugar on the race, but it's going to provide me with mental comfort. I mean, a lot of why we eat is for comfort. And if you don't produce something that's comforting to people, well, there goes your sustainability. You're not going to stay in business for much longer. I also know it's good environmentally through the upcycling. You know, I formulated truffle. Some of you may have tried them today. Meltaways, panned items, bars, all kinds of items that I know will have a health benefit lasting for people that will actually be enjoyable to taste. I mean, so many, like I said, I cannot go over again how many products out there are terrible, taste and bloating and everything else. So, you know, for me, the sustainability it's great with the environmental factors, but to be able to keep a product on the shelves for longer that people are excited to eat and not feel like they have to eat, that's the most exciting, you know, part of the trifecta for me right there.
Fantastic. My mind's just going on where we can go, and it's super exciting listening to all four of you. So thank you for that. And what I'd like to do now is just open it up to some questions for this panel, for anybody who has one.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you on the panel. Wonderful learning experience here. I'm just curious about heat stability, upper range, as well as has anyone, maybe more to the chef, has anyone tried this in a pizza dough?
I can't speak to what would happen to the health benefits through heat stability, but I know through heat stability it did not change the perceptible textures. And what I mean by that is if I made a raw item I made a lemon vinaigrette and put it in, which was room temperature, it was just as smooth as when I cooked it. I know sometimes when I cook some functional items they can clump up or get gritty or anything, but no perceptible textural differences when it was cooked.
Yeah, some phytonutrients can be damaged by heat, so to really know for sure, you'd have to test before and after. So, yeah, depends on the matrix that it's in, and I imagine there will be some degradation, but should be some therapeutic benefits left over for sure.
Hi, Danielle with NutraIngredients USA. I know you talked a little bit about further product development, but I'm just curious, is there any plans for this to be encapsulated or perhaps put in a gummy?
Sounds like a terrific idea. Yes. We're going to get our director of innovation on it immediately.
Hey, Ed. I have a question from Becky Epstein, and her question is, how do they deal with the heavy metals in the chocolate and cocoa?
You mean like heavy metals in chocolate in general? Because we have guidelines and maximum. So we choose the cocoa beans that don't have like cadmium, for example, or lead into our chocolate because of Prop 65. So all our chocolate, that's how we deal with it. It's basically choosing the right cocoa beans that we know have lower content for heavy metal.
Justin Siegel with UC Davis, so I'm going to ask a science question. Right? And I know not asking you about the science itself, actually, because I think you're the right group to think about what science to do. And it'd be great, actually, to hear from each of you. We saw a lot of great studies today about all the benefits, and I think as was mentioned first, you got to own your own science. So it'd be interesting, just from your perspective, from the studies you saw today, what would you like to see next? Like, what would be that next study that you're like, wow, if they showed that, this is a no-brainer?
I think if we're pulling from FODMAP research and like the diet, world, there's some newer research looking at like FODMAPs and mast cell activation, and mast cells or immune cells in the gut are a really big area of interest for irritable bowel syndrome, mast cell activation syndrome, maybe those connections to like Ehlers-Danlos and POTS and kind of that complicated world that's emerging. So it'd be interesting to see, I don't know how you would do this, again, I'm not a scientist, but seeing how possibly these polyphenols impact those mast cells or even eosinophils, and kind of just looking deeper at that immune connection would be fascinating, and maybe in 10 years be the big thing that everyone cares about.
From my perspective, everyone loves gummies. Everyone loves low dose gummies. You can only fit about 200 milligrams practically into a gummy, preferably 150. So ideally, I'd like to see a lower dose study so you can just have a small, 3-4 gummies, 600 to 800 milligrams. to see some of the therapeutic benefits at a slightly lower dose.
I'm really interested in the type of claims that we can make. It's, what more can we discover about the product and what future claims we can do, because, this is how you sell a product, is how can you position it on the market, what claims can you do. I think that's what I'm more interested in the future. What more can we say about it and what can we claim about it?
I like what I've seen. I mean, I'm just going to be honest. It performed well for me. I would like to take it back into my kitchen for more testing and try to break it, so to speak. Like, I always love to find the upper limits of any product I work with. I haven't found them yet, but I'm more than willing to keep trying and then come back to the team and say, this didn't work in this application. How can we make it better? Or how can you concentrate it into a smaller form so I can get into a smaller batch and still have the same results? But I hope that helps.
I'd like to ask, can I ask a question? Going back to, and this is for Valerie and for Chef Girard, from Ralph's presentation, like that really deep, intense flavor chemistry research that, from John Manofo's lab and that Ralph was talking about, is that like really familiar territory for you guys, or is that like a new sort of depth of level with an ingredient that you've seen? I'm just curious about your reaction and how you work with that.
We do similar research, like we've analyzed cocoa, just to analyze every component that there is in cocoa. So I am familiar with it, but what I found really interesting also is that it was done on the separate element in the Chardonnay Marc. The seeds, the pulp, and the question that I would have for Ralph is, you have the aroma profile for each component, but I'm interested in what's the aroma profile for the Chardonnay Marc, and does it fit with each component? Mm-hmm. Does it make sense? Is there any kind of synergy in it? Mm-hmm. But we've done at Barry Callebaut similar studies on cocoa, identified every molecules in it. But yeah, it would be interesting also to look at it for the final chocolate, and not just component, but Chardonnay Marc. And once you have it in chocolate, what does it look like? And I'm really interested in the synergy of all these ingredients combined together.
All right, I think I understand this question. When I try to teach flavor, for my students back in New York at the culinary school, taste plus flavor equals aroma. And the usual example I use is a cup of coffee. And I say, what's the taste? And some of them understand, and they'll say bitter, and then the aroma, and they'll say coffee. And, I say, well, that's my flavor of coffee. But if you delve deeper into the coffee, you have different, aromatic notes. You could get burnt, you could get toast, you could get fruit, you could get tar, you could get ground, you could get whatever, vanilla, bourbon, so many compounds in there. And I think as I would apply Ralph's presentation to the chocolate is, chocolate has so many aromatic compounds, and when people smell it or they taste it or they eat it, they get multiple notes. Some people don't. I hate to say someone who's simple, but sometimes simplicity is elegance. They may eat it and just get chocolate, right? They're not getting that there's hints of vanilla, or they're not getting that there's hints of toast, depending on how, dark the beans were roasted. And this ingredient doesn't change that. So I think from a taste plus flavor aroma, taste plus aroma equals flavor, I don't think that the average person would even notice this is there, which I think is a good thing, because, there are tasters, there are super tasters, there are people who are looking for perceptible differences, but I think this reigns supreme, and it doesn't affect what I would say 90% of the population would be able to detect. And that's who I would want to sell to.
If I can just quickly add also, I've worked on a project where we analyze a chocolate and its degradation through time. we did sensory evaluation with, super panelists, basically trained panelists. And we always confirmed that the data that we got from the panel via gas chromatography. And at one point we realized that our sensory analyst or panelist in the sensory test that we did were as good as doing after gas chromatography. And we realized it wasn't even necessary. The panelists were trained and they were well trained and they could figure out what it tasted like, to the point where I was told you don't have to send samples all the time to have it tested in the lab. Just the sensory panel was enough to detect off flavors, for example. We were trained well enough to detect it, and it wasn't even necessary to do all these analyses in the lab.
I have another virtual question. This is from Melania. Can you discuss any future developments or plans for the product and its applications?
So right now, from an innovation standpoint with the WellVine team, there's a few things in formal development. Creation of a concentration of nuts with the chocolate. We've seen already our chocolate-covered almonds are extremely popular. They're extremely tasty. We think there's more opportunities with different varieties of nuts and to do different types of clustering with the chocolate and nuts. So that's an area that we're exploring. Some of the panelists have already talked about nutrition bars. We think that's a category that is ripe for development. There's a lot of usage of language in marketing, honestly, that sort of tells a story that maybe isn't as true as some of the panelists have identified, where the Chardonnay Marc could be used in replace of some other things that provide a natural sweetness or could reduce the sugar content of things that so we're looking at that space with bars. And then from truly exploratory, shelf-stable beverages, there's applications. We've talked with Valerie and Cal, but we think ice cream is an adjacent category where a chocolate-flavored ice cream with our product could be really fascinating. So there's a lot of things in development. Probably the next thing you'll see Scott alluded to, which is just the WellVine Chardonnay Marc with the cacao that we've talked about. That's probably the first innovation that will come next. That will be provide the opportunity for claim base. And as I've said, I'm already experimenting with that myself. I know Chef has as well. But they make phenomenal smoothies. My personal favorite: almond milk, a banana, our ingredient, and a protein like a peanut powder. So you've got all plant-based, highly nutritious, low calorie, and from an absorption standpoint, everything works really beautifully. So there's a lot of application, but that's kind of the broad general direction at the moment.
And the Vine to Bar controlled brand strategy is one we recommend and potentially very successful. The Vine to Bar drives the awareness of the WellVine. People love that brand, and then other brands want to launch. So it's a very good strategy to have a controlled brand that you're controlling the message and getting the word out on the street, and then other brands see that and they want to add the ingredient as well. So good strategy coming together nicely.
Okay, I think with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Harold for those closing questions.
Grown hops in Michigan. They used to be growing there quite a bit, but we brought them back, and it was really interesting. I've heard a lot of talk about the coastal Chardonnay, and a lot of the varieties that we brought back from out west perform very differently in the terroir in Michigan. Actually brought out a lot of notes that weren't there in the West, and we've actually created some different. They're the same variety, but it's totally different flavor for brewing beer and stuff. And I'm wondering, you guys, I heard some discussion about maybe the coastal Chardonnay is going to have a different profile, or this might be different than the Chardonnays grapes that you guys might be bringing in from other areas. So I didn't know if there's any discussion on that or.
Great question. Scott, do you want to address that?
I'll talk about it a little generally. We actually have Dr. Tori Arvik, who is Director of Applied Research, is that what you are, for JFW? And he knows way more about this than I do, so if we need to, we can have him come up here. But one of the things that we know about coastal Chardonnay, and there's actually a paper that confirmed this. So, Valerie was talking about the value of human evaluation of flavor and taste and everything, and we've known for a long time that coastal Chardonnay was special, that there were things that you could do with those grapes that you couldn't do with grapes that were grown lower elevations, warmer climates, little less stress on the plant, etc. But what this paper essentially did is it took grapes that were grown in coastal regions where you have two things that seem to affect the quality of Chardonnay grapes more than anything else. One is nighttime temperature. So at night, you want those grapes to cool off. If the temperature remains high and the grapes continue to have that really high temperature all throughout that 24-hour period, you see a decrease in quality. And by a decrease in quality, we mean a decrease in aroma, taste, other things like that, color, etc. So the paper evaluated this using a scale, and they found that nighttime temperature was one of the biggest determinants of whether or not you got a high-quality grape. We know that coastal grown grapes, it cools off at night. Those of you who got up early this morning to join us here and came over, that beautiful fog that was there this morning, that's what we're talking about, right? That fog comes in, it cools things off, and it also waters the grapes. So you actually get, instead of having to irrigate and such, you actually get some hydration of the grape too. So that's one thing. And the other one, the other parameter that they looked at in this particular paper was called GDD, or growing degree days. And that's the number of days that reach a certain threshold on temperature where the grape is actually able to continue to develop and to move forward. What was interesting about this paper is that it said that higher numbers of growing degree days were also associated with lower quality. So if you have more growing degree days, again, the plant has less stress, doesn't have to work as hard, it develops fewer of these interesting flavor and aroma compounds. So what this means is that when you put it near the coast and you get those cool nights, combined with more moderate, instead of the larger the higher temperatures for a longer period of time, which increases the number of growing degree days, you actually have an increase in quality. The plant has to struggle a little bit at certain times. It gets to recover at night, and that's when it puts on these compounds that are associated with higher quality. So what we all knew intuitively, and what Barbara and Jess have been saying for years about the superiority of these things subjectively has now been proven objectively in science and through published research. Tori, did you want to add anything to that?
All the research you saw today was not done on generic Chardonnay. It was all done on WellVine trademark Chardonnay. That was Chardonnay harvested from these specific vineyards with these high qualities, processed in a proprietary way to preserve all of the benefits. So when you read the papers, it will very clearly say this is an assessment of Chardonnay, WellVine trademark Chardonnay attributes. So
that's a great point, Jeff. Thanks. And Russ, you actually talked about this. This is one of your criteria, right? Science done on your product, not borrowed science, not science that's been done on someone else's and applied to yours generically, but original science done on the very thing that you are selling. That's what we're talking about. That's the point here. All of the research that we've been done has been done on coastal Chardonnay that was grown and sourced from our partner Jackson Family Wines, right? Who really dominates that sourcing capability. So it is a unique material. It's a material that's been verified several times to have, properties that you don't get from others.
Thank you. Eric Hamburg here from PIPA. Thanks to all the speakers. Super informative. Love the session. That's my comment. And then maybe the question is, and I don't know if Ralph can hear this, but maybe others can answer, but you guys did a really nice job talking about the various different ways in which you process it. When you harvest it, then you freeze it, and I think I heard you dry it, and then you grind it. And I don't know if the companies looked at different ways to process that material that might either preserve some of those polyphenols or even maybe enhance them. And if there's ways that you could concentrate that to use it in different, that material in different products, could be interesting.
So one of the things that I'm not sure, I had a couple of people actually, Timothy and others mentioned to me, they thought one of the most interesting things that Ralph said is we've got all these levers in our manufacturing that we can use to tweak and really kind of tune the product in different ways. So one of the ways you could tune that is with taste and aroma. We've already done a little bit of that work, actually. I don't know how many different drying systems we've looked at, how many different milling systems we've looked at. Over the last, dozen years or so, believe me, we've tried just about everything you can think of. And what we do know is that you can actually alter that somewhat. You can actually provide more caramelized notes, for example, by increasing the temperature at certain points in the drying process, right? So you get this caramelization that occurs. We know that it also makes a difference how quickly you process the material. So one of the keys to the way we do it is we take it out of that wine press and we stabilize it immediately so that we don't get degradation of the material. We know that particle size has a lot to do with it. Particle size not only affects texture, but it also affects, interestingly, bioavailability. So we actually see an ability of the body to extract some of those important biochemical or phytochemicals depending on how the material is ground and how it's processed there. So there's a lot of different levers that we can work with. And being able to break it down in the way that we have, I think we can confidently say we know more about really the chemistry of the Chardonnay grape. I'm not talking about the wine, I'm talking about Chardonnay grape, than pretty much any group on the planet, right? So now we have all this wonderful information in there. We understand what all of those components are. And as we start getting more and more correlation with the benefits that those components provide, whether they're sensory or experiential benefits or whether they're health benefits, we can start to make those fine tweaks. And with Pippa's partnership, potentially we have the ability also to apply AI to that to understand how all of those things might change over time and change with different parameters. So it's really exciting, we think. We think that there's a lot to be done there and that the possibilities are endless. I will say of a lot of the ideas that came out today, though, Valerie, I really like your coating idea. That's my next big thing. I think that's a great idea, and I'm going to be all over that. So thank you very much.
Very cool. Surprising trifecta feels like a $1 billion ingredient in the making here. This is pretty cool.
So I'm going to exercise chair privilege here, unless, Ed, you want to say something.
No.
No? All right.
No, the only thing keeping us between wine and chocolate is you.
Me. All right. Yeah, I knew you wanted to say something. So I'm going to say a few things, so, drag it out just a few minutes. But number one is I did want to recognize Mike Danielson. Mike, you can raise your hand, hopefully. Mike actually, there's always in terms of network theory and that sort of thing, there's always these, sort of quiet people behind the scenes, but everybody knows that person, and Mike is that person for this room, and so really appreciate everything you've done to help us out in that regard. Thank you very much for that. And then a few things. So this is my, sort of, reflection stuff from 30 years of being in the industry. So I've had a really extraordinary opportunity from actually 30 years in the food industry. Much of those as a chief science officer for one of the world's largest food companies. And then I also had 5 years prior to that getting my graduate degrees in research. And so just want to say that I've seen a lot over that time, and I want to hammer home a few things, because I've seen a lot, and I've also seen a lot of people miss sort of what's happening. And thanks to Mike and a few others. You guys are, it's a real privilege to be in this room, because I can tell you it's a privilege for me to be in this room. And there's a few reasons for that. So number one is I had a chance over a few decades to actually help to lead and create a paradigm shift, which is an overused term, but when it happens, it's a really rare and special thing. And so the paradigm shift was actually that that chocolate could be healthy, and so the cocoa flavonols piece and what Dr. Holt talked about. In getting to that point, we actually fought complexity. So we utilized the time-worn path of taking something that was really complex, which Valerie knows as well as anyone, except for Ralph. Ralph knows more about that complexity, as I mentioned. But, that cocoa is really complex, and we fought that complexity, and utilizing a reductionist approach, which now seems very 20th century, since we're in the 21st century, we figured out exactly, what molecule was, largely responsible for a certain effect. And what you guys have been witness to today is what I like to feel is going to be the 21st century approach to food science and food and health. And that is not fighting complexity, but actually creating paradigm shifts by embracing complexity. And Scott actually, as I've worked with these guys over the last few years, it was a few years ago that Scott he kept saying it and drumming it in, but it's really true. It's like the beauty of what's happening with the Chardonnay WellVine Marc is we're embracing the complexity, and we're thinking about this from a whole food perspective. And I do a lot of work with a lot of people around the world, and it takes me to some interesting places. And during the last year, my standard talk, if you will, is about how food science is a 20th century science, and we need to create a food science revolution that is about, becoming a 21st century science. And it's this embracing the complexity that is actually going to get us there. And you guys, should feel privileged. I feel privileged. But what you saw today was a world-class representation of embracing that complexity in terms of the natural products chemistry, and not just being satisfied with studying only health or only the sensory and flavor part, but actually the combination of those things. This is a rare event. My colleague Justin Siegel from UC Davis can definitely tell you this. We run around universities and you go lab to lab to lab, and it's a siloed out thing. What you saw today was not a silo. What you saw today was a community, and it's a world-class community that's actually introducing a new model and a new way, of approaching food and health. And it was really cool, again, to see that Journal of Agriculture and Food Chemistry recognize that. The other thing I want to say is that I've had the privilege over the last 35 years or so of seeing some great innovators. And there's a characteristic of great innovators, which is they see what everybody else sees in terms of observation, but they see something different. And so I mentioned that I'm really, grateful and pleased that Barbara and Peggy hosted this event today, and that's, it's really awesome. It's a great event, and really appreciate that. But actually, they saw something. They saw what everybody else saw 12 years ago, or whatever it was. Peggy, you can cite the day, but they saw something that nobody else was seeing. And what they saw is what we're seeing now today, and from a science perspective, the complexity we're embracing. So, it's really cool to be in the presence of genuine innovators, and these ladies are that. And it's great to be involved in this program in that regard. So, enjoy lunch in a bit. What you're now going to enjoy is going to be a really cool presentation of the most interesting chocolate you have ever tasted in your life. You've heard Valerie talking about it, but now you're going to taste it. And just in an incredible setting with paired with some great wine as well. So I am going to turn this over to Tori and Ed to take us through this.
So the first part of the process is actually we're going to take a short break so that the team can come in and actually what's on your table. You'll see the tasting mat. And so we're going to actually put some wine in those glasses and some chocolate in front of you, and we're going to eat and drink very shortly. All right. I will do my very best to do my Ralph Jerome impersonation. He can't be impersonated, so like I said, I'm going to do my best on all the education that Ralph has given me. But in my role over the past 2-3 years, working with Vine to Bar now, we've conducted a number of wine and chocolate pairing events where we've introduced people to the chocolate. I've seen Ralph do it. I've done a few myself, so I'll do my very best, as I said, to represent what we've got here. And I'm going to be partnered with Tori, who Scott briefly introduced a little while ago. But Tori and I are going to take you through the properties of the wine and the chocolate. So the first thing I want to do is we're going to start, what you have in front of you is you've got 2 flavors of the 4 varieties that we have, and we wanted to work with those to pair with the wines as well as the chocolate-covered almonds. And what I want to do is start with our plain dark chocolate. And so the first thing I'd like you to do is open that, but before you eat it, and I'm asking you to do the hardest thing of all, right? Don't eat it until I tell you what to do. Okay. So go ahead and open the dark chocolate, that tasting square. It's the green colored one. It's the small tasting square on the mat. And right now we have it on the mat paired with one of the Pinots, but we're going to have you taste it with both the Chardonnay and the Pinot. So before you put it in your mouth, go ahead, open it up. And somebody just did it. Terrific. Go ahead and give it a smell before you smell it, before you do it. Just like our wine tasting experiences, let's go ahead and get into the chocolate in a similar way. We're going to smell it first. And then, as Valerie and Ralph would tell you, one of the first things you'll notice about premium dark chocolate are those aromas. Some of us are tasters, super tasters. When I worked at Coca-Cola in product innovation, as part of my role, I would taste things along with some of the other team members. I'm a decent taster. I'm not a super taster. I can get a lot of notes. But to Valerie and Ralph's point and Harold, go ahead and smell that. You're going to get the chocolate. You may pick up some of the fruit notes. You may get some of the other toasted notes that were described. There's a lot of complexity in this chocolate. The acticoa and the flavanols actually provide some aroma, as Ralph was describing. So give it some sensory. And then before you, again, put that whole thing in your mouth, go ahead and break it. I want you to snap that. And again, Valerie and Ralph will tell you, and Harold, a sign of a really good premium chocolate is that snap, and how it was tempered, and how it was made, and how it was either panned or molded. And so that's the first next step. Go ahead and do it. And then give it another sensory experience. Go ahead and smell that again once you've broken it. Now, take part of it, not that whole thing, you've probably broke it in half. Go ahead and put it in your mouth, and before you chew down on it, let it melt a little bit on your tongue. The melting temperature of chocolate is close to our body temperature, and so what you're going to get is, as it starts to dissolve, you're going to get even more of those flavor and aroma, the things that in your mouth, the mouthfeel will change a little bit, it'll soften, and you'll actually experience more of the notes of the chocolate when you let it melt just a little bit on your tongue. So let's go ahead and do that. And then what you should be experiencing now is what we've been talking about all day, that taste where the 65% dark chocolate finishes with that fruit note, which really tempers the bitterness of the high flavanols that Valerie put in the chocolate. So hopefully everybody's kind of experiencing that. Let's talk a little bit about the wine that we're going to experience it with now. And Tori.
Yeah, thank you. Tori Arvik, Director of Applied Research, Jackson Family Wines. This is a great job. Like, I got tapped to eat chocolate and taste wine today. So we have 3 wines today. You will notice an aluminum cup in front of you. That is a spit cup. I recommend you don't use it. We don't have them, Ed, so we're safe. We're going to start off with the Chardonnay, and again, we're going to start over with the purity on just the regular dark chocolate. And go ahead and take a sip of the wine. Blow some air through it, suck some air through it, taste it, get it all around your mouth. It's creamy, it's buttery. This is from the Kellyanne vineyard, which has a lot of sort of stone fruit, pear, creme brulee kind of characters to it. Pairs very nicely with the chocolate. And then I like this other one too. Let's go to the Arroyo Seco Pinot on the far right and do the same thing. Take a sip, suck some air through it, swallow it, breathe out, get that retronasal going. Very different wine, very different experience. Really earthy characters, on almost like forest floor, mushroomy, but some plum and some raspberry coming through there as well. Also very good with this chocolate.
And so while you're tasting it, go back to the chocolate, go back to the wine, get that whole sensory thing going with the two. And one of the things our good friend Michael Jordan has always said, when he first experienced this, Michael is one of the few people in the world that carries both the Master Sommelier and Wine Educator titles and has been a great partner to us in doing our wine and chocolate pairing events, is that historically, chocolate has always been paired with sweeter wines. And that these drier wines that pair so beautifully is another piece of the uniqueness of what the Marc is bringing to the chocolate, is that these dry wines pair so beautifully with it. And maybe you can describe a little bit of the sensory and why that happens.
What I'm loving is the velvety, sort of powdery, dusty tannin that's in the chocolate, because it goes really nicely with these wines. They also have that sort of powdery tannic finish. The bitterness I'm getting is actually from the wine in this case, and not the chocolate, which I think is pretty fascinating as a food scientist. So, again, going back to this Pinot, it's a little closed right now, but I think I'm getting more and more of that fruit. And that I'm used to drinking port wine with chocolate. That's kind of how I was raised, port wine and chocolate. So this is a
and now we have something that can be paired with these drier wines, opening up a much broader way of how you can experience chocolate and wine and chocolate pairing. Let's go now to our chocolate-covered almonds.
Yeah. So obviously higher in fat, crunchy, salty. As Ralph was saying, anything with dark chocolate and salt is heaven. I think you'll experience a little bit of that. Try this with the Chardonnay. Toasty notes, almond obviously, and then the salt really extends that finish and really kind of brings a little lubricity to that tannin in the mouth.
It's a really nice California story too. All the almonds are California, roasted here in California, raised, covered with this beautiful chocolate with the 15% Chardonnay Marc, all from California.
So for me, this one, the almond is really accentuating that buttery character in the wine, that oaky butteriness, which I really, really love. And again, that pleasant salty finish. Quite nice.
Scott has suggested we put a label on the package of the almonds warning about the addictive nature,
Yes.
So be careful.
Absolutely.
Only 7's a serving, so be careful.
Interestingly enough, though, I was telling Ralph that my daughter's a real sugar hound. She loves all kinds of candy. And he was saying that this is probably the lowest glycemic index.
We actually did a study, and it's absolutely a low glycemic food.
Yeah.
Only 4 net carbs. It's a really, and I know we have a couple of, as we know, registered dietitians in the room, and it's one that we were at a conference for the dietitians conference, and the chocolate-covered almonds were a real hit with the dietitians because it was one of those things that they even described it as sort of, this is that sort of thoughtful or mindful indulgence that I can have that doesn't spike my insulin, doesn't do the bad things that we heard about earlier.
All right, so should we try
Let's go to the
Sea Lift?
Let's go now to our tart cherry with cocoa nibs.
So this was one that Ralph called out specifically. The tart cherry chunks inside the dark chocolate really pull out the fruit and the brightness of those organic acids in the wine, and I think you'll enjoy this as well. You can see the little. Very nice. Also very earthy wine, very dry, lots of tannin, long finish.
So what do you guys think? Is there combinations that you prefer? Whenever we do these wine and chocolate pairings, there's typically somebody has a preference for one or the other, and it kind of describes that. Does anybody have a favorite that's standing out for them? There we go. The Michigan guy likes the tart cherry. Love it.
I really loved your comment about the hops, because we started this venture back in the day talking about where it grows and how that matters. And what you were saying about taking a plant from a known place to a different place, you get a completely different expression. And I think that's something people, they're starting to notice more and more. And when you called it terroir, I thought that was fantastic as well. I think as people are looking for culinary experiences, the sustainability piece, you go to a winery and you see the goats out in the vineyard, you see, the care that goes into the winemaking and that kind of stuff. But then the place really matters. If you go to Lodi, you're going to find some lovely wines. If you go to the Central Valley, it's more of a workhorse, because at 2 a.m, it's 95 degrees outside. And so, again, it's about juice and volume. Compared to on the coast, where Scott was referring to this resting period, this recovery period of a cool nighttime. So very, very different ecology, very different soils, and very different expressions. So I really like the hop analogy.
So do we have some preferences? Yeah. Any preferences? You like it all? Mm-hmm. That works too. Valerie, question for you. Experiencing the chocolate in this way, I know when you're developing chocolate in the lab, you're not typically doing it with wine or working with all the flavor variations that we've created. What's your sense of what we've done with the flavor variety of the chocolates and how they pair with the wines?
My favorite one is the one with the cherry. And again, I was a little bit skeptical. I thought, why are we adding more tart or more acidity to the chocolate? But it's actually my favorite one. And yeah, I love it. And I think it pairs really well with wine also. I've worked on building a class of wine tasting and chocolate many years ago. Best Mondays of my life. Just tasting everything. But it was really difficult to pair chocolate with wine. The dryness, like you said, doesn't pair well typically with chocolate or regular chocolate. And we tried, white, milk, dark, different cocoa content. It did not pair that well, except when we had sweeter wines. So I'm actually really surprised that it pairs so well with, this chocolate.
Valerie, what do you think about the tannins? Because this second chocolate with this second wine, I think this is a pretty bold Pinot. I still have it in my mouth, and
it's completely different from the second Pinot Noir.
Yeah.
It tastes more typical of a Pinot Noir. And you see it just by the color also. You can see through the glass.
And you were mentioning the fat. Typically, you would have this with something like a steak or something, something like a fatty food. And this would sort of relieve your mouth of that fattiness. And I'm actually enjoying the staying power of the dustiness.
Yeah,
almost.
same.
Justin, we have a request from Harold for your opinion, I think.
I was distracted by ruffles.
What am I giving an opinion on? Sorry.
You're a chocolate guy. What do you think?
I was saying I really my go-to is the tart cherry and a nice Pinot after the kids go to bed. I think that's a good way to end the day. And then the almonds are my day drinking one.
So we see that UC Davis cup on your desk and the opaque one.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now we know.
Yeah. Currently sponsored by Manavi, but we'll see. Maybe we can.
Definitely time for a change.
Wow. So Ralph was saying that if you like the tart cherry, it's pretty much you've selected yourself away from your standard chocolates. Is that accurate? Like you've basically pigeonholed yourself into sort of,
Well, it's certainly something that's very unique to what we're doing. The tart cherry, I think Ralph would describe, one of the things that it does so nicely is actually enhance the fruit note of the Chardonnay Marc. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of playing well with it and actually enhancing it. And then, of course, you've got a little bit of salt on the chocolate-covered almonds. We also have a Chardonnay smoked salt variety. And for whatever the reason, the salt on the WellVine with the chocolate is just a really wonderful combination. So let's continue to enjoy those, and I think we're going to move to lunch here shortly. And great. So thank you.
Awesome. Well done, guys. That was great. Yeah. It was interesting to see which ones Ed took. So just the last comment to close the symposium. We started off, I think slide 2 said seeing red. I think via the Chardonnay paradox, we are seeing beyond red. So I have a good friend who passed away a couple of years ago. His name is Norman Hollenberg, and he's one of the people who discovered the role of nitric oxide in vascular biology, which actually he didn't win the Nobel Prize, but that did win a Nobel Prize in 1998. And he was really fond of the phrase of, if I have seen further, it's because I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. And I think that it's safe to say we all love and respect our red wines, but it's really nice that from a Chardonnay perspective, I think we've clambered up on top of those shoulders and we're seeing a little further now via Chardonnay. So if I had a glass, I'd say here's to Chardonnay, and everyone else does. Good. Cheers. Here's to Chardonnay. And thank you all for a great symposium, and thank you to the speakers and their great talks. And now we're looking forward to a wonderful lunch with Chardonnay Marc in every item. So let's enjoy. Thank you, guys.